Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I don't know exactly what happened. I have some suspicions, but I'll tell you how it was. I had just finished high school and was about to start college. During my last year, I worked for my grandfather as the farm manager. My task was simple: follow the instructions he left to take care of the property, mainly feeding the cows in his absence. It was early February, and baseball training had just begun, always after class from 3:25 until 5:30 in the afternoon. When I arrived to work, the sun was already almost setting. I put on my work clothes, picked up the buckets, and began feeding the animals on the first property. That's when I realized I had forgotten the key to the other farm. Frustrated, I improvised. I picked up 2 buckets at a time and carried them to the trough, walking about 40 meters for each trip. To distract myself, I started whistling without following a melody, just making something up to pass the time. When I finished and was placing the last buckets back in the truck bed, I heard something coming from the neighboring farm. It was another whistle. I found it strange. No one was living there, and the sound seemed very close. I thought maybe it was a bird, something like a mockingbird, and continued with my work. In the following days, even without whistling, the sound returned. Each day it seemed clearer, more defined, until it sounded like a real human whistle. Then it became so loud that it was impossible to ignore. At first, I could barely hear it because of my footsteps, but over time, I got used to it and even started to expect it, until one day, the whistle didn't come. That day, I had remembered to bring the key. As I reached the gate, I let it fall into the grass. "Damn," I muttered, bending down to search. That's when I heard something, a distant sound coming from the neighboring farm. A low, strange moan that grew stronger. I wasn't scared, just curious. I left the truck parked at the entrance and walked along the road until I jumped the fence of that property. The terrain was sloped and full of trees. The higher I climbed, the denser the vegetation became. A strong smell took over the place, a disagreeable mixture of garbage and something like a wet dog. When I was near the top, I heard it again. "Damn." The voice was deep, hoarse, almost metallic, as if someone were repeating the words slowly and off-key. It sounded like an old smoker speaking slowly, without fluency in the language. My first reaction was to think there was someone on the property. I felt anger and suspicion, so I continued climbing, more slowly now, trying not to make noise. I wanted to discover who it was before they noticed me. I kept advancing, but stopped for a moment to listen when a sound caught my attention. "Damn, damn, damn." This time, the voice was no longer drawled or strange. It was as if someone were saying "damn" naturally, almost casually. I sat on a log nearby, trying to listen better and understand what to do about this person. The stranger continued repeating the word, but something changed. His tone began to imitate mine, including the frustration I had used when I said it earlier. It was then that I realized he was imitating me. Perfectly. My irritation mixed with fear, and I decided to act. I got up, climbing the rest of the hill with firm steps. I turned on my cell phone flashlight and shouted, "Hey, this is private property." My sentence was cut short as soon as I reached the top. The weak light illuminated a crouched figure a few meters from me. It was a human form, but not exactly. Something was clearly wrong. Its eyes in the light were enormous. It didn't move, but its long neck twisted so that its head faced me without the rest of the body leaving its place. Its face was narrow, disproportionate, with a larger than normal head. The extremely thin body left the ribs protruding, almost as if the skin were stretched over the bones. It was crouched in a strange posture, reminiscent of a ballerina's position. For a few seconds, I was frozen while an unsettling silence hung in the air. Then, as if it were a machine, it began to move. It turned slowly, the leaves rustling under its feet, and stood up. Its hands hung at the sides of its body, and I noticed it was too tall, almost abnormally tall for a normal person. "Damn," it said, imitating my voice. My instinct took control. Without thinking, I turned and ran downhill. It didn't seem like my legs were moving by their own will, but rather that my body was acting on pure reflex. I didn't look back at any moment. I only stopped when I reached the fence, jumped it any way I could, and got into the truck, driving away as fast as possible. I still work on that farm, although this experience has never left my mind. I've never told this story to anyone, not even to my grandfather. Since then, I've heard the whistle only a few times. Despite this, I'm not exactly someone who believes in paranormal things. I always seek rational explanations for strange events, but this situation, well, it could have just been a very peculiar intruder. Or maybe not. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. In November of 2018, during the Thanksgiving celebration, I hit the road with my family, heading to my sister's house. She lived in Nashville, far from Minneapolis where we were staying. Despite the distance, the effort was worth it to spend some special time with my brother-in-law, who was more than just part of the family. He had become my greatest confidant since I became a father. I lost my own father when I was still a child, and my friends only started building families much later, around their 30s. So when I needed advice about fatherhood, he was the one I turned to. These conversations, which began with practical tips, blossomed into a deep friendship. We arrived, and as usual, he welcomed us with an impeccable dinner. During the evening, he mentioned that he wasn't feeling very well. He even reported that a strange liquid was coming out of his ear, but he quickly minimized the situation, saying he had faced similar infections before and that it wasn't cause for concern. The night continued peacefully. We put the children to bed around 9, and we adults went to bed close to midnight. However, shortly after 1 in the morning, my sister woke up and found her husband sweating and trembling in bed. He said it felt like he had a fever. He went to the bathroom, took some medicine, and tried to rest, but the situation didn't improve. By 3 in the morning, he was still awake with no signs of getting better. In the morning, my sister got up early to take care of the children, being careful not to make noise and let him rest. When I passed by later with breakfast, she mentioned that he was still sleeping. That seemed strange to me. He was never the type to stay in bed, even when he wasn't at 100%. And I realized something wasn't right. We decided to keep him resting, while we tried to ensure a quiet environment so he could recover. When the afternoon came, and some attempts to make contact by phone didn't yield results, my wife and I decided to go to the house to check how things were. Arriving there, a feeling came over me as soon as my sister opened the door. I became even more uneasy when I saw her face was pale, almost colorless. She asked me to go upstairs quickly, explaining that she urgently needed my help. In the bedroom, we found my brother-in-law breathing irregularly. A bright green mucus was dripping from his nose. Desperate, my sister tried to wake him, but he didn't respond. The sound of the liquid in his lungs as he breathed was agonizing. She ran to get water, hoping to wash him and perhaps startle him enough to regain consciousness. But suddenly he stopped breathing. At that moment, we exchanged glances, and we both knew the situation was extremely serious. My sister, who had experience with cardiopulmonary resuscitation, known as CPR, began to guide me on how to proceed. We pulled him from the bed to the floor and started to alternate between chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth breathing. It was at this moment that things started to get rapidly worse. We shouted for my wife to call emergency services and asked my mother to take the children out of the house. My wife ran up the stairs with the phone in hand and found us applying CPR. While we performed the maneuvers, a frightening amount of blood began to come out of his mouth and nose. At first, I didn't even realize it was blood because it had a dark, almost brown tone, completely different from what we see in films or series. I was completely unprepared for that. There we were, my sister and I, both crying and struggling to maintain chest compressions on my brother-in-law, while my wife stood next to us, talking to the emergency service operator. In a moment of desperation, I tried to check his reaction and opened his eyelid with my thumb. That was a big mistake. His eye didn't move, didn't focus on anything. It was something I can't erase from my memory. I pulled my hand away, but continued CPR. My sister, amid the chaos, ran around the bed to get some shorts to dress my brother-in-law before the paramedics arrived, so he wouldn't be completely exposed. In this process, another unexpected scene occurred. His intestines emptied while we tried to dress him. My sister began to cover him with her hands and cried, saying, "He's urinating, my God, he's urinating." I responded, shouting that we were doing everything we could and that he would be fine, but we both knew the reality was different. It wasn't a question of being okay. It was about how serious the situation would become. When the paramedics finally arrived, we stepped aside to let them work. I felt immediate relief. I thought they would stabilize him, bring his heart back. After all, we're in the 21st century, right? This kind of thing is part of their daily routine. They started working quickly, doing chest compressions and attaching him to equipment. A device was adjusted around his thorax, performing automatic compressions. Seeing his body being forced forward and back repeatedly was devastating. We placed a sheet around his waist before they took him down the stairs. I ran to the bathroom because a metallic taste, like a mixture of coins and bile, was taking over my mouth. I quickly rinsed while the team went down the stairs with him. Right after, I shouted, "Get the kids out of the house now." My wife took the children to the yard, ensuring they didn't see anything. As soon as the ambulance left, we rushed to the hospital. Arriving there, we waited outside for the ambulance. When it finally arrived, I saw his chest still mechanically rising and falling, while his eyes remained closed. I ran to the waiting room and told my sister and my wife that he had arrived. After that, all that remained was to wait. It seemed like an eternity had passed when they called us to a small room. As soon as the doctor asked if he could close the door, I already knew what was coming. He explained that they had done everything they could, but that my brother-in-law had passed away. What came next is a bit hazy. I didn't cry immediately. There was disbelief, confusion. My sister, on the other hand, cried uncontrollably, screaming that it wasn't fair, that they should grow old together. Eventually, I broke down too. The environment was one of absolute pain, and no one there could console themselves. With time, things improved a little, or at least became easier to handle. The company I work for was extraordinary in this difficult moment, and even funded grief therapy sessions for me and my sister. Friends and family united, and my sister received about $30,000 in donations, which she decided to save for the boys' future. It was a moment that revealed much about the people around us. I discovered who really matters, and I am deeply grateful for each friend and family member who was with us. Later, we found out that what happened to him was the result of a devastating combination of problems. He had pneumococcal meningitis caused by a bacterial infection, which was aggravated by a lung infection, another in the ear, and an already enlarged heart. In the end, his body went into septic shock. If I can leave advice for anyone reading this, it's this: seek a doctor at the first sign that something is wrong. Don't ignore it, don't wait. In just 11 hours, he went from a slight tremor in bed to passing away. Don't think about the cost or the inconvenience, just go. Each second with those we love is infinitely more valuable than any monetary value. My brother-in-law was a healthy man. He exercised regularly, was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, went everywhere by bicycle, cooked with fresh and organic ingredients, did yoga. He was only 39 years old. Despite all this, he's gone. We lost an exceptional human being, an impressive martial artist, and a dedicated father. The void he left is immense and eternal. When I was young, I worked as an attendant at a restaurant in my city to get money to fuel my car. It was there that I met Mr. Noland. At first, in my innocent view, he seemed to be an ordinary person, despite being in his late 20s and interested in a teenager like me. I always left work at night, and this made me quite apprehensive. Because of this, I developed the habit of getting into the car, closing the door, and locking it in one quick movement, something that gave me a sense of protection. One of those nights, already in my car, I was surprised by Mr. Nolan, who appeared out of nowhere and tried to open the door, pulling the handle forcefully. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he gave a smile. But what I saw in his eyes deeply unnerved me. I can't translate into words the evil I felt in that moment. From then on, I began to fear him, but I never let it show, concerned about the possible consequences of telling him I never wanted to see him again. After this episode, he started inventing absurd stories to impress me and sought ways for us to be alone. But my instinct told me to avoid him at all costs. About 2 weeks later, the restaurant was the target of a robbery. There were solid indications pointing to Mr. Nolan's involvement, but nothing sufficient to legally incriminate him. I sent the police chief all the messages I had exchanged with him, hoping they would be useful. After this, he disappeared, but the fear didn't. I spent years looking over my shoulder. 5 years ago, he reappeared, sending me a message on Facebook out of nowhere. He talked about a supposed ultra-secret military authorization he possessed, and about a huge property he claimed was his. This left me suspicious, as if he were plotting something, but I did my best not to let myself be consumed by this thought. Today, while reading about an unsolved murder case, I was shocked to see his photo on a criminal record. He now faces accusations of homicide and 2 other violent crimes. Knowing he is in prison brought me enormous relief, but it also impressed me how accurate my instinct about him was. See, my childhood was genuinely good. I know that admitting something like this might seem uninteresting these days, considering we're in an era when people frequently share their pains and traumas. But this is the truth. I had no conflicts with my mother or father, who have been together for over 40 years. Neither of them ever mistreated me. At school, I never suffered bullying, and unlike my 2 best childhood friends, one dealing with liver problems and the other with diabetes, I never had to face any chronic illness. For a long time, I thought this was great luck. I observed how so many families around me had their own difficulties, such as divorces, relatives struggling with addictions, or situations that left my colleagues with that air of premature exhaustion that seemed so common in high school. But none of this happened to me, and I also saw no signs that anything like this could arise in the future. It was then, during Thanksgiving holiday in 2015, when I was 15, that I realized not everything in my family was as impeccable as it seemed. My father has a brother who is almost 20 years younger than him. For much of my father's adolescence, he was an only child until the day he received the news that he would have a little brother. My grandparents always described my uncle's birth as an unexpected blessing, which is the same as saying he was an accident. As the youngest, he grew up being treated with every possible indulgence. This made my father and him completely different, not just because of the age, but also because of their way of seeing life. My father served for a few years in the Marines. He wasn't a rigid person, but he definitely carried some of the military discipline with him. My uncle followed very different paths. First, he tried music. Then he ventured as an artist, and later decided to be a writer, but always without much success. All this because my grandparents filled him with so much confidence that he believed determination was enough to compensate for the lack of talent. I, however, always liked him. For me, he was a laid-back and fun guy. I didn't understand why my father criticized him so much. He seemed so relaxed, so open, and I could talk to him about things my father considered nonsense or irrelevant. I always looked forward to when he would visit us, and I was grateful that, although my father had his disagreements with him, They never argued in front of me, at least not until that famous Thanksgiving Day. A few days before, during dinner, my father commented to my mother that my uncle would bring his girlfriend for the holiday. I was excited to meet her. After all, anyone who would be with my uncle should be as interesting as him, right? I noticed my parents were a bit tense, but I imagined it was just because they didn't know the girlfriend before such a family occasion. Shortly after, Thanksgiving Day arrives. My uncle appeared with his girlfriend and began introducing her to everyone. She was truly very beautiful, I remember that, but she seemed completely out of context with her leather jacket and tattoos. Even so, my family, as always, was very welcoming and did everything to make her feel welcome. During dinner, my father made a toast, we ate, and then everyone dispersed. The men went to watch the highlights of the games. The women went to the kitchen to have coffee, and the younger children gathered to play together. At that moment, I decided to go up to my room and turn on the video game. I don't know exactly how long I played, but it was already dark when I decided to go downstairs to get a soda. Perhaps around 7:30 or 8:00 p.m. As soon as I reached the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, the sound from the garage caught my attention. The door that gave access to it was right there, next to me. I thought everyone was in the TV room or playing cards in the dining room. No one should be in the kitchen, much less in the garage. So my first question was, who was there, and more importantly, why? It could be something simple, like an animal, maybe a raccoon, but the possibility that scared me most was imagining someone breaking into our garage. After all, it connected directly to the house where everyone was, unaware. And me too. Slowly, I held the doorknob, hesitating for an instant. Then, with a quick impulse, I opened the door. What I saw paralyzed me. My uncle's girlfriend was there. Something about her seemed completely wrong. Her eyes were dull. There was blood running from her nose and mouth. My first thought was that my uncle was trying to help her, but before I could understand, he hit her violently right in front of me. The impact was so brutal that her head swung as if it were made of cloth. This scene is still clear in my memory, even after so many years. Instinctively, I slammed the door hard and ran to the TV room with my heart pounding. I pointed to the kitchen and shouted, "Uncle Tony is in the garage." His name wasn't Tony, but I'll call him that to describe the moment. Immediately, everyone ran to see what was happening. The police were called, and in less than 15 minutes, that Thanksgiving night turned into absolute chaos. Police cars and ambulances surrounded the house, and my uncle was taken away in handcuffs, while the girlfriend went to the hospital. After that, my parents sent me back to my room. I went up slowly, thinking they were angry with me, but later they explained something that would take me a while to fully comprehend. Many of a parent's actions have as their sole purpose to protect their children. Sometimes it seems they're being annoying or arbitrary, but most of the time, they're just trying to preserve the well-being of the people they love most. I'm not talking about abuse or truly cruel attitudes. It's about those decisions that seem like punishments or limitations, but are actually gestures of care. That's how my parents dealt with Uncle Tony. They never wanted to completely cut him out of our lives or fill me with resentment against him. They maintained a delicate balance, allowing him to be present in some moments, but without telling me about what he did. The drug use, the petty crimes, the thefts he committed against my grandparents, and as I witnessed that night, the terrible way he treated women. This brings me back to a detail. As I mentioned before, Uncle Tony, again, not his real name, was arrested that night after my father and some neighbors forcibly held him at the entrance to the house. Meanwhile, his girlfriend needed to spend the night in the hospital. The doctors suspected a concussion, but in the end, she just had a broken nose and a cut lip. I believe my parents covered her medical expenses. I remember my mother visiting her sometime later, probably to talk about the possibility of reporting the case to the police. To this day, I don't know exactly with what intention my mother went there. She always insisted that she just said something like, "We'll support you whatever your decision," and that the choice to press charges was entirely the girls'. I don't say this is impossible, but I know many stories of mistreated women who are afraid to go to the police for years. Sometimes something makes them act on their own, but other times they need encouragement. Maybe that was the case here. Or maybe my mother understood that if no one encouraged her to break the cycle, the pattern of violence would continue until an inevitable tragedy. Either way, the case went to trial, and my uncle decided not to contest the charges since there were many witnesses. He was sentenced to 6 years, of which he served 3. It was at this point that my parents cut any ties with him, and at the time, I had no objection. I didn't want to see him again either. In the first days after the incident, however, my reaction was quite different from what would be expected. I wasn't furious, horrified, or shocked. I was devastated. It was hard to accept that someone I admired so much could do something so terrible. My mind refused to process it, as if it were some kind of misunderstanding. And although I hate myself for having thought this, I even considered if the fault wasn't somehow hers. Why would he have reacted that way? Did she try to rob him? Did he catch her using drugs? There had to be some explanation that would justify something so extreme. But spoiler, there wasn't any. Nothing could justify what he did. The penny only dropped when my mother returned from a visit to my uncle's ex-girlfriend, still recovering, and told me what had really happened. This also made me reflect on something that had been intriguing me since the incident. Why didn't she scream? If they were arguing, how did it escalate from near absolute silence to physical aggression without any increase in tone or sound that would alert someone? This doubt fed my naivety for days, reinforcing the idea that there must be more to that story than I was able to see. But there wasn't. It was just the harsh and simple truth. My mother ended up telling me something that didn't come directly from a question, but emerged in the middle of her report about the visit to my uncle's ex. The reason she didn't scream while he was beating her was simple and terrifying. She had learned that if she screamed, he would hurt her even more. This detail did 2 things to me. First, it revealed how long that cycle of abuse had been happening. Second, it made me truly hate my uncle. There's something incredibly cruel and sadistic in this type of behavior. And after I understood this, I couldn't look at him the same way again. It was as if I finally saw the uncle my parents had tried to spare me from knowing. Maybe this sounds like a cliché from many stories. I thought he was a good person, but he was a monster. And as trite as it may seem, I can understand why these stories continue to resonate. It's a universal truth that many face. discovering that things aren't always what they seem. The difference is that many of my school colleagues had already learned this lesson much earlier, dealing with family difficulties and disappointments even before we reached adolescence. I, on the other hand, only understood this later, almost as an adult, when I realized that sometimes we think we know someone, but in reality, we don't truly know them at all. When I was 13 years old, on Thanksgiving Day of 2001, something happened that I can't forget for several reasons. That evening after dinner, I sat at the top of a hill near my house. At the base, a group of trees marked the boundary of the school. The neighborhood children used to transform that hill into a playground, running downhill and competing to see who passed through the trees first. It was a silly game, but the steep incline made everything more exciting. That day I was alone, but I decided to play anyway. I got up and ran downhill as fast as I could. At that moment, I felt like the happiest boy in the world. But suddenly, I was lying on the ground, looking at the sky. A cutting pain took over my neck, as if someone had passed a blade through it. I brought my hand to the spot, looked at my fingers, and found a frightening amount of blood. It was then that my eyes adjusted, and I saw what had caused it. Between two trees I had passed through, a fishing line was stretched with 3 strands braided together to make it more resistant. I was perplexed. Why? Who would do this? Before I could understand, I heard voices about 6 meters away. A group of teenagers, probably from 8th or 9th grade, was sitting on bicycles, laughing and pointing at me. One of them said clearly, "I can't believe he didn't see it. What an idiot," and I never knew who those boys were. I didn't know them, never did anything against them. But for some cruel and pointless reason, they decided to turn my night into a nightmare. I felt pain, confusion, and above all, fear. Fear that this wouldn't be enough for them, that they would come back to finish what they started. I gathered all the strength I had and ran toward my house. On the way, I tripped on the curb in front of the White Hand Pantry, which today is a 7-Eleven. Fortunately, I found a woman who helped me. She lifted me up, bought some bandages, took care of my wound, and suggested I go home. After that, it took me a long time to trust people again. I started analyzing everything around me before allowing myself any moment of fun. This experience of nearly losing my head, literally, stole from me the lightness of my childhood years. A few years ago, in 2017, when I was 14 years old, I experienced something that still haunts my memory almost daily. My father lives near a small lake in Maine, in a neighborhood with about 100 residents. My brother and I used to spend 1 week there and another away, so we practically knew everyone in the area. My father's house was the second one on a high hill. At the top, there was a gas station and a diner where I worked as a waitress during the summer. At the base, there was a quiet beach next to the lake. That day, I finished my shift at the diner and bought a slushie at the station. My plan was simple: go down to the beach to relax. That's when I noticed a classic car parked in front of the diner, a dazzling petrol blue model that seemed to be from the 60s. I'm not very good with car brands, but it had something that caught the eye. Inside, there was an older man at the wheel, and in the passenger seat, a woman who appeared to be his wife. The windows were closed and they were far away, but it was impossible to ignore that they were looking at me. I found it curious, but didn't give it much importance and started walking back home. On the way, I kept wondering who they could be. It wasn't common to have tourists, and such a unique car would have been noticed before. The diner was on a little traveled road, used mainly by residents, so I deduced they were just passing through. Later, my younger brother and I went to the beach. We stayed there for a few hours until we decided to return. I ended up getting a bit ahead of him and started climbing the hill before him. There were about 50 meters between us, and he could see me clearly, but we were distant enough not to talk. As I climbed, I heard the sound of a car approaching. I looked back and moved to the side of the road. To my surprise, it was the same petrol blue car. When they passed me, they slowed down, and I felt a chill down my spine. The window on the passenger side was lowered, revealing the woman who was in the car. That's when fear took over. Both she and the driver seemed to be wearing realistic facial masks. I couldn't see seams or edges, not even holes for the eyes, but the eyes seemed strangely real. They weren't their skins, of that I'm sure. Something about them was too disturbing to ignore. The woman asked me about a road I had never heard of. Since I didn't drive, this wasn't so strange, but I still pointed to the highway near the diner that led out of town. She thanked me, closed the window, and the car continued on its way. I ran to my brother and told him everything that had happened. He, in turn, said he found the two completely normal when they passed by him. But it's curious because that morning, they also seemed normal to me. The masks were too realistic. Someone would need to be quite close to notice how strange they were. Still, something about them deeply disturbed me. Indeed, they didn't do anything that could be considered really out of the ordinary. Besides asking directions to a road to a girl, clearly too young to drive. However, in that small community, I might have been the only person they crossed paths within hours. But what marked me was their appearance. I've never seen anything like it before, and to this day, I haven't found anything similar. When I got home, I mentioned the incident to my father. He listened, but didn't have much to comment on. Even now, more than 6 years later, I still feel deeply uneasy when remembering this. Despite not believing much in supernatural events, I continue to think they were humans, but why the masks? What was the purpose of them being there, and more so, of asking directions from a girl who obviously didn't drive? I can't help thinking about this and wondering, has anyone ever experienced something so strange? I'm 21 years old, and in my final year of college in Minnesota. I live in a somewhat remote area where the nearest supermarket and fast food place are about 20 minutes from home. I study in St. Paul in a complicated area where the presence of police officers doesn't bother, but rather brings relief, given the number of problems with drug users. I've witnessed situations that are impossible to forget. It's important to make it clear that I don't have any common physical issues. I'm 6 feet tall, weigh 240 pounds, most of it muscle, although I know I could lose about 15 pounds or more. I really enjoy smoking, drinking, and eating. Like any good student, I chose a solid career, accounting. I do an internship at a medium-sized public relations company, working with accounting and getting paid hourly. College is expensive, so to supplement my income, I deliver pizzas at night after my shift. The pizzeria is simple, with low prices and an absurdly large delivery range, about 20 minutes from my house and 5 from the beach. I live north of the place, and deliveries cover up to 50 minutes beyond my house. At the moment, I'm writing this at work, between reviewing contractual clauses to ensure clients are being charged correctly. And believe me, they always try to find a way to come out ahead. But anyway, the further north you go from the pizzeria, the more rural the scenery becomes. I work until closing, usually around 9:45 p.m. Last night, while folding pizza boxes, the attendant appeared with a delivery order. She commented that the customer seemed strange on the phone, as if speaking with a full mouth or through a ventilator, and the sound resembled a gurgle. With my experience in St. Paul, I immediately thought of someone under the influence of drugs. But in this area, it's more likely to be some medication-induced madness. Sensing that something unusual was about to happen, I took the address. It was practically in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't very excited because driving there would be a pain, but I accepted. Besides, the order was quite weird. A large pizza full of extra ingredients, anchovies, ground beef, ham, sausage, pepperoni, about $30 just in add-ons. I went to ask the attendant if it was correct, and she replied that she thought so. She wasn't sure because she barely understood the call, so she did what she could. Since she's only about 16 years old, I let it go, thinking she might have been distracted. I decided to call back to confirm. The phone rang 5, 10, 20, 30 times, and it was answered. I hung up and tried again. This time, the call went straight to, "The number you dialed has not set up a voicemail." Goodbye. Okay then, my manager made the pizza anyway, and we followed the order. I went out to deliver a pizza to an incredibly funny guy because he was so big and tall, and shortly afterward to a couple who invited me to drink. I thanked them but declined. I don't drink or smoke when I'm working. I returned, hoping someone had already delivered that strange order. But to my surprise, or rather my misfortune, no one had. So there I went to pick up the pizza and put it in the car with reluctance. I put the address in the GPS. It was on a side street, near a park known to residents as open space. Despite the name, it's a huge forested area of about 500 acres. The place is practically at the limit of our delivery area, about 25 minutes from there. I started my Subaru Turbo, put on some electronic music, and began to drive. If you don't know rural regions, it's hard to explain, but winter in the forest is unsettling. There's absolutely no sound, unless something bigger than a cat is moving around. It's just you, total silence, and that feeling of being watched. I finally reached the address. The street has a few houses, but they're well apart from each other, with lots that seem to be at least 5 acres. I'm looking for number 1134. I pass by 1130, then a long stretch of deserted road. The numbering starts again at 1140. Great. I just want to end this quickly and get another delivery without getting into trouble. I try to call their number again. The phone rings several times and suddenly stops. For a moment, I'm speechless. Someone answered but doesn't speak. I only hear a buzz, something between a hiss and a muffled sound. I turn up the sound in the car, and the noise increases so much that I immediately turn it off to avoid damaging the speakers. The windows start to fog up, and stopped between two houses, I decide to lower the windows. That's when a horrible smell, like rotting garbage, invades the car. It seems like the kind of odor you find when passing through Newark in New Jersey. It's unbearable. I engage first gear and head towards the next house to try to escape this. At the end of the driveway, I see a stone with a light on top. I decide to knock on the door of that house and ask if perhaps they had given the wrong number when ordering. This would be quite typical of such customers. I approach slowly, about 30 meters away. When I step out of the darkness and enter the illuminated entrance area, I feel an enormous relief. Finally, the customer. I expected to find a completely out-of-it guy, stumbling or with strange behavior, but he seemed surprisingly calm. I parked the car about 3 meters from him. He was wearing a huge coat, about 3 sizes too big for him. Despite this, he was quite tall, probably about 4 inches taller than me. I avoid staring at him directly at first. I get out of the car, grab the pizza, and prepare the change in case he's paying in cash. I say, "Sir, sorry for the delay and the calls. The delivery was far." He doesn't respond. I get suspicious. That strong smell is still in the air, but it's not garbage collection day. I put the pizza on the car roof and look at him again, this time more attentively. Finally, I can observe him properly. The guy is enormous, practically a giant. He's barefoot, wearing a torn jeans with stains spread all over. I try to focus on his face, but his eyes are sunken, as if the pupils had disappeared, leaving only black holes. With the dim light, it seems like I'm looking at craters. The feeling of discomfort grows with each second. He still hasn't moved or said anything. I interrupt what I'm doing and stare at him. He returns the stare, fixed and disturbing, with those shadowy eyes. His head oscillates from side to side, but in an erratic way, as if it were stuck, moving in small jerks, like a car door that's jammed and needs an extra push to close. I observe the irregular movement of his head for about 10 seconds, unable to look away. Between the horrible smell, the strange movements, the frightening eyes, and his complete silence, I feel my unease reach its peak. My mind is racing. I maintain eye contact while I take my cell phone from my pocket, holding it next to the car roof to be able to alternate my gaze between the screen and the man. Out of pure curiosity, I dial the number that had called before. The phone starts ringing, but the sound doesn't come from the expected direction. I wait for a second, and then I hear it. It's coming from the forest. In the midst of that deep silence, I hear the muffled sound of a cell phone ringing about 50 meters among the trees. Panic fully sets in. The only thing I can think of is how this situation could get worse. I look at the guy again. He's still standing there, swinging his head irregularly. And then something hits me like a punch. He's smiling. I take a deep breath and gather courage to speak. "Can you take this, please? And look, I think you dropped your phone in the forest or something while you were, I don't know, hiding a body or something like that." The last sentence comes out with a nervous laugh, as if I were trying to convince myself that it was all just a misunderstanding. But his smile remains. His mouth finally opens, and he emits a low, strange guttural sound, followed by a more acute grunt, like a person trying to clear their throat. I already have one foot on the driver's seat, ready to flee, when he finally speaks. That phone isn't his. The pause between phone isn't and his is far too long, which makes the words even more disturbing. The first part sounds like a single slurred word, and his comes out with a higher tone, almost shouted. My entire body is on maximum alert, a mixture of fear and confusion. My legs feel weak, and I'm one step away from fainting. I push the pizza to the opposite side of the roof, as far as possible from me, and finally manage to stammer, "Sir, you're scaring me. I have a .45 and less than $30 with me. Just take this and let me go." Upon hearing this, the swinging of his head suddenly stops. He stares at me, those black eyes seeming to pierce my soul. Then his mouth opens again. It was his. My brain is overloaded. I can only ask, dazed, "His what?" "The phone was his," he repeats while advancing a step in my direction. He doesn't walk normally. He seems to be propelled by spasms, as if his body were being pulled by a strange force. "The phone was his," he repeats once more. My fear reaches an unbearable limit. I'm almost crying. He jumps again, closer to the car now. The phone is no longer his. At first, I can't say anything, just babble without meaning. But then I find the strength to shout, "I'm going to call the police if you don't get out of here." I see the man sketch that disturbing smile. The strangest thing is that without moving his lips, I hear a different voice, something I've never heard before. "Go away. Stop following me. I'm going to call the police." With a sudden movement, he stretches out his hand, grabs the pizza from the car roof, and leaves a few quarters in its place. Only later do I realize they're covered by a dark, thick liquid that spreads over the metal. I don't think twice. I get in the car, drive away without looking back, and accelerate down the road. The pizza's thermal cover stayed there, as well as the car door that I didn't even have time to completely close. I drive like a madman, reaching something like 80 miles per hour for about a quarter mile. The adrenaline makes me turn around because, in my desperation, I fear getting even more lost. I return along the road where I had been, but he's no longer there. I finally reach the end of the path and see a stop sign before entering the main road. I look to the right, making sure no one is coming, and turn left. I almost have a heart attack. That thing's face is mere inches from my window. I don't think. I simply accelerate and dash down the road. I arrive at the pizzeria, trembling from head to toe. I get out of the car, and for the first time at work, smoke a cigarette to try to calm down. When I finally enter, the attendant, with that casual tone that doesn't match at all what I had just experienced, says, "Hey, the guy from the open space house just called back. He said you forgot some food, but he only ordered the pizza, right? He wants you to go back." Tears start to flow before I can respond. I take my phone, which had fallen in the car during the escape, and see 14 missed calls from that number. I listen to the voice messages. The first ones are in complete silence, but in the last one, there's just an irregular breathing and those same low grunts that make my skin crawl. I cry in front of the attendant, who, despite being pretty, doesn't diminish the weight of the moment. I sit in a chair and stay there for about 10 minutes, trying to compose myself. Then I remember the change he had left on the car roof. I go out with heavy steps and a flashlight in hand. When I illuminate the car, I see that the roof is covered with a thick, sticky substance with a strong copper smell. I can't hold my stomach and vomit between the rear window and the trunk. The 25-cent coins are stuck in this goo, and next to them, I notice a small piece of strange, soft tissue. I open the car door and am petrified. There's a line of that same viscous liquid starting on the dashboard and going to the driver's door. He tried to open the door while he was beside me at the stop sign. I return to the pizzeria, crying even more. I ask the attendant to call the number again, but the calls go straight to voicemail. The next morning, I give the number to my uncle, who is a police captain in several cities around here. He investigates and discovers it's a disposable cell phone purchased with cash, impossible to track. The phone seems to be turned off now. Today, I can only sleep with the lights on. As I was walking through the aisles of the department store with my young son, an elderly lady, appearing to be in her 70s, approached us. She was alone and commented, "Miss, just so you know, all the canned vegetables are on sale for 50 cents this week." She continued enthusiastically, explaining it was a rare offer and worth taking advantage of. I thanked her with a smile. "Thanks for the tip. I'll grab some before I leave." As she began to walk away, she looked back and noticed my son, stopped, and observed us with a smile. Curious, she asked, "How old is he?" I replied, "He just turned 1 year old." She continued the conversation, asking if he was my only child and adding some random questions about him. Then she unexpectedly changed the subject. I remembered I have some clothes in my trunk. They're all for boys your son's age. Would you like them? At first, I politely declined. "We're busy now. I don't want to take up your time." But she insisted, "Oh, it's no problem. I can wait outside and meet you before you leave. You're a single mother, you need them." At that moment, a feeling of discomfort took over me. Something seemed out of place. I explained firmly, "No, I'm not a single mother, and we already have everything we need." "Thank you very much. Even so," she continued, "I simply don't know what to do with these clothes. If you could use them, I'd be happy to give them to you." The situation started to sound suspicious, as if she wanted to lead me to her car. I maintained my position, thanked her once more, and walked away. I continued shopping, but when I happened to look down one of the aisles, I noticed the same lady, now accompanied by a younger man, attentively observing the movement of people. Maybe I'm exaggerating, and it was all just an innocent gesture. Still, my instinct told me otherwise. There's something about being a mother of a small child that attracts the attention of strangers, usually in the form of kind comments. However, this interaction diverged from the casual conversations I usually have in similar situations. Has anyone ever experienced something like this? A few years ago, my life took an unexpected turn. I was staying at a friend's house while attending university. I shared the space with him, his sister, and their parents. Shortly after, about 2 weeks, the sister decided to bring her boyfriend to live there as well. Initially, he seemed to be the type of person everyone likes, charismatic, full of interesting stories and very sociable. The nights were filled with conversations in the garden or around the table, accompanied by laughter and reflections. As the first month passed, however, the facade began to crack. He revealed an obsessive side about conspiracy theories, constantly positioned himself as a victim, idolized alpha masculinity ideas, and talked too much about martial arts. Additionally, his temperament was explosive. He had a large dog, always locked in a cage, that became extremely agitated when he wasn't present. The tragedy came when the animal attacked his own girlfriend and had to be euthanized. That's when his emotional game began to intensify, accompanied by endless manipulative speeches. 2 months later, pressured by the parents to leave the house, he decided to live in a container and took the girlfriend along on this adventure. It wasn't a beautiful, well-planned project, but rather a rented container in a depot on the outskirts of the city. There, he intimidated the local staff until the police had to be called. For him, this was just more proof of a conspiracy against him. The situation worsened, and he became increasingly abusive toward his girlfriend until the family intervened to rescue her. I ended up getting closer to them, pretending to support the boyfriend to ensure we could get her out of there safely. When they finally separated, he blamed me for the breakup, claiming I was manipulating her so she would be with me. She moved on, found a new partner, and we all cut contact with the ex, blocking him everywhere. But he didn't give up easily, continuing to pursue everyone until he disappeared. Or at least that's what we thought. Last year, the messages started again. Several fake accounts appeared, some friendly, others threatening. One of them pretended to be a university acquaintance. We chatted about life, and he went so far as to invite me to a party at a house, assuring it would be full of people and completely laid back. I planned everything, including time off from work, and maintained contact with this person. When I mentioned the party to my friend's sister, she showed interest in going, but everything changed when I revealed the address. It was a property belonging to the ex's father that was for sale. Her panic was immediate. On the scheduled day, I called the police to investigate the place, claiming a possible break-in. There they found 5 people, including the ex. In front of the house was a van equipped with items to store food, as well as knives, hammers, and ropes. I can only be thankful that I decided not to show up. During the night shift at the restaurant where I work, something completely out of the ordinary happened. It's a place that operates non-stop, day and night. And anyone who has been in one of these knows well the type of situations that can arise. The restaurant is located near an open field surrounded by trees. And that night, while the cook and I were going out to smoke, we heard a scream in the distance. We thought it was just some homeless person passing through the city, as happens frequently. We went back inside without giving it much importance. Later, I went to the back again, this time to throw the trash in the dumpster near the field. I thought there was no problem since I hadn't heard anything else. As I was walking away, I heard a voice much closer. "Hey, come here. Hey, come here." That was enough to put me on alert. I ran inside and called my colleague, who had a car with a spotlight. We decided to illuminate the field to try to see who was there. Yes, it was a reckless idea, but curiosity spoke louder. Despite not seeing anything, the voice continued, insistent. "Hey girl, come here." At this point, I called the police. As soon as I finished the call, a man appeared coming out of the field. He was older, wearing a long beige overcoat, and began to walk rapidly towards the restaurant. My colleague and a customer hurried inside, clearly suspicious of his behavior. With the phone in my hand, I called the police again. Meanwhile, the cook went up to him and asked him to leave. The man, completely out of control, began to shout and threaten. "I'll end your life the next time I find you." He gestured with his hands near his waist as if he wanted to show a weapon. From where I was, I couldn't see anything, but the tension was evident. Fortunately, the police found him on the road shortly after. When the officer reached us, he explained that he was a homeless person with mental health issues, nothing we hadn't already suspected. We told them everything that happened, and the cook filed a complaint. However, the outcome was frustrating. The man refused to provide his name, and the police said there wasn't much they could do. Before leaving, they warned us. He is known to carry a knife in his waistband. "If you need us, call again." Later, the man returned. This time, he crossed the neighboring parking lot and went back to the field, continuing to shout the same, "Hey, come here." When the movement increased with the closing of the bars, we got busy and didn't hear anything else. But I know he's still out there. It's not the first time I've seen him. I've already found him sleeping behind the dumpster before. My manager arrives in the morning, and I'll try to convince her to use the security footage to capture his image. I want to alert the other colleagues who work the same shift. What concerns me most is that the field where he's camping is next to an elementary school. Despite this, the police insist they can't do anything. I hope he goes away or gets arrested before something serious happens. When I was 11 years old, my father suggested we take a walk before Thanksgiving dinner. At that time, we lived in Maple Hills, a small suburb north of Portland. It was a great place to grow up, with a spacious house, a room all to myself, and a large backyard. At the back of the yard, there was a gate that led to a woods, and beyond it, a river with a strong current, very popular among kayakers. Instead of complaining about being in front of the TV, I accepted my father's invitation to go to the river to throw stones in the water. It was one of my favorite games, especially because I could only go accompanied by him. I remember how I loved the sound of large stones plunging into the river, that satisfying plop. My father said that if we used the bit of light left for the walk and returned, dinner would be ready when we arrived. It seemed perfect, and we set off. We followed the path to the river with a flashlight, although there was still enough light to see. When we got there, I did what I always did. I looked for the biggest stones. My father also started throwing some, and we were having fun until he found an especially large stone. He said something like, "Look at this one." While trying to dislodge it, he stepped on a loose stone on the bank and slipped. He fell sideways and, in a quick movement, slid into the water. At the time, the situation seemed almost funny to me. The sound of the fall, the awkward way he ended up in the water. I thought he would get up like he did when he jumped into the pool. But that didn't happen. When I approached, I saw his body being carried away by the current. That's when I realized something was very wrong. The sight of his jacket disappearing in the rapid waters made my heart race. I started running along the bank, calling for him, shouting, but with no response. The more I ran, the more despair took over. Tears came when he completely disappeared from sight. Still, I continued running in search of help. Something inside me said he wouldn't return, but I couldn't give up. I ran to the nearest neighbor's house, where they called rescue services and took me back to my mother. The memories of what happened afterwards still crush me, not because they are vague, but because I can relive each painful detail. What marked me most was watching my mother and my older sister lose hope that my father could be alive, even after hours in a freezing river. I wanted so badly to believe with them, but a part of me always knew he wouldn't come back. When they confirmed they had found his body, it wasn't the hardest blow for me as it was for them, but it still nearly destroyed us as a family. Years have passed, and even with therapy, self-help books, faith, and even addictions, we still carry the scars of that Thanksgiving day. There isn't a day when I don't think about it. Small, insignificant things bring back those memories with unexpected force, as if time hadn't passed. I know that perhaps this isn't the typical story you expected to receive, and I understand many might see it as sadder or more tragic than frightening. But for me, the true horror is in that instant when I realized something was wrong. I think about the quick reflection of my father's jacket in the water, the cruel rhythm with which the current carried him away, and that's what terrifies me. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to exchange this memory for nightmares of Freddy Krueger, or to live with friendly ghosts, the kind that even share the bills. Anything would be better than reliving that image every day. And what I wanted most was to have had the chance for a proper goodbye, to truly know the man who was my father. In the late afternoon, around 5 p.m., I, a woman in my early 20s, went to the neighborhood market. Since it's winter, it was already dark at this hour where I live. I was in a quiet aisle, calmly choosing what I needed, when a man, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, with fair skin, glasses, and a thin beard, positioned himself right next to me and stood there, motionless. At first, I didn't pay attention, thinking he was just analyzing some shelf. However, after a few moments, I realized he wasn't doing absolutely anything. He just remained standing there. It was then that I decided to look at him, and realized I was already being stared at. For a fraction of a second, I imagined he might say something. I stayed there waiting for a word, but as he didn't say anything, I simply turned and quickly walked away. At that moment, I thought to myself, what a strange situation, but maybe he's just an awkward man. I continued my path through the market, but not even half a minute later, while I was in another aisle, I saw from the corner of my eye that he was approaching again, fixing his gaze on me. I didn't hesitate. I quickly left and went straight to the self-checkout. While scanning my purchases, I couldn't stop looking back, checking if he was still around. Fortunately, he wasn't. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that perhaps my imagination was creating paranoia. Already at the exit of the store, I decided to take one last look, and there he was, a few steps behind me. It was then that I noticed something that made me even more uncomfortable. He wasn't carrying absolutely anything in his hands, no purchases. He seemed to be only following me. Instinctively, I stopped walking and stared at him again. He, who was already watching me, lowered his eyes to his cell phone and walked right past me, leaving through the door without a word. At this point, my heart was racing. I just wanted to get to my car, which, fortunately, was very close to the exit. I immediately called my fiancée and ran to the vehicle, locking the doors as soon as I entered. Even so, I continued looking around and saw him once more, wandering among the cars in the parking lot. He didn't seem to have a destination. He was just walking around without purpose, with my fiancée on the phone. I began to feel a little more calm, observed him for a few more seconds before driving away. Until now, I can't understand what happened. Maybe he was just someone strange and socially awkward, or maybe he had ulterior motives. The fact that he wasn't even trying to be discreet, and that he hadn't bought anything at the market, leaves me intrigued. Even though he was inside the store when I arrived, everything seems disconnected and disturbing. I feel divided between thinking I was overreacting or accepting that it was indeed a frightening and inexplicable encounter. To begin with, I don't know exactly how you deal with delicate issues like this one, so feel free to leave it out if you think it's better. However, I would like to suggest a warning about the topic of suicide. Although I personally don't feel the need, I know many people who greatly value this kind of care. If you can include it, I believe many would appreciate it. I tried several rehabilitation methods that simply had no effect. And when I experimented with street drugs and learned to get them on my own, avoiding opiates became even more difficult. In the end, I convinced myself that the only solution was to end my life, so as not to be a burden to those around me anymore. I only tried once, but I survived. When I woke up in the hospital, my parents found out what had happened. It was like a reality check. I saw the bottom of the pit I was in. We then decided to completely change the approach. No more rehabilitation or urban programs. I went to the middle of nowhere, to a remote cabin that my parents had as a vacation refuge. I stayed there with the goal of getting rid of the addiction once and for all. That would be a transition, a space between what I was and who I could be afterward. And I knew with certainty that my future wouldn't include pills or substances that weren't in a common pharmacy. I remained in the cabin for 4 months. The place was in terrible condition, but I think that reinforced my will to improve. Renovating it became a valuable distraction, and somehow, cleaning and organizing that space had a calming effect on my mind. It was as if I were cleaning myself throughout the process. I transformed that space into a home. I spent the entire autumn there, including Thanksgiving. By that point, I admit I was really missing my family and any kind of company. When my parents proposed visiting with an improvised dinner of turkey, stuffing, and cranberry sauce, I accepted without hesitation. They came and we had a simple and peaceful afternoon together. Then we went to bed early and woke up in the same calm state. I prepared eggs for breakfast. They packed their things, and before leaving, they asked if I wanted to walk with them. It had been a long time since we had walked the cabin trails, and it would be good to revisit those childhood memories. I remember the old trail, because it led to an iron bridge that crossed over a shallow creek. As a child, Crossing it terrified me. The railings revealed the creek below, and looking through them caused an intense chill down my spine. But over time, I overcame the fear, and the bridge ended up becoming one of my favorite places during our visits to the cabin. We started the walk, following the winding paths, climbing until we reached the bridge. When we got to the spot, we noticed a man standing by the railings, looking at the creek. Since there were several cabins nearby, I imagined he was doing the same as us. A peaceful walk to clear his mind, perhaps before or after a meal. We didn't call out to him. I thought that if he looked at us, we would just exchange a discreet greeting. We kept our voices low, enjoying the silence of the forest. It was an atmosphere that naturally made us speak little and in a soft tone. But he didn't notice our approach until we were almost on the bridge. When he saw us, his expression changed so abruptly that I immediately knew something wasn't right. He seemed frightened, as if thinking, "It can't be," or something similar. Before we could react, he jumped. My mother let out a stifled scream, and my father held her as if wanting to protect her from an imaginary danger. I, on impulse, ran to where he had jumped. I don't know exactly what I was thinking. Maybe it was just instinct, an attempt to prevent something inevitable. But when I got there, he was already falling. He didn't calmly climb the parapet to launch himself. It seemed more like an awkward fall, as if he were throwing himself too quickly, trying to ensure the impact would be lethal. But that's not what happened. The fall was disastrous, and the state he ended up in has never left my mind. I prefer not to go into too many details, but the impact didn't kill him. He survived with several broken bones, conscious of everything. The sight was already terrible, but the sounds were even worse. He couldn't scream, though he tried with all his might. He only emitted a hoarse sound, almost like the croaking of a frog, and short. After hearing that, I couldn't bear it anymore. I ran back to my parents, and we hurriedly returned to the cabin in silence. Fortunately, the cell phone signal in the area was decent, so I was able to call the emergency number without problems. I explained to the attendant what had happened, and soon a forest ranger arrived at the scene. When he appeared, however, the man in the creek was no longer making those terrible sounds. To be honest, I believe that even if the ranger had arrived at the exact moment he jumped, with all the necessary supplies, nothing could have been done. He was in an irreversible state, completely beyond any help, and I'm sure he died in unimaginable pain. A month later, I left the cabin. It wasn't the only reason, but seeing that man take his own life on the bridge definitely influenced my decision. I didn't have nightmares or anything like that, and I don't want to seem selfish here because what happened to him is a complete tragedy. But I couldn't help but think, that could have been me. I could be down there, trapped between pain and death, trying and failing to let out a final scream. That's when I realized I would be okay. The only thing I knew for sure was that I never wanted to end up that way. I had felt that despair before, but I had never stopped to think about how selfish it would be to end my own life. I always thought the selfishness was in continuing to live, in being a coward, by accepting my existence as an addict forever. But I learned that choosing life is the most courageous act of all. Getting up, getting dressed, and facing what the day brings, that's the real battle. And there's a kind of glory even in the smallest victories. Besides, No one deserves to see what I saw that day. Not even those who consider themselves as useless as I considered myself. Because now I know that the dead can haunt us, not as ghosts we see, but as memories that never leave us. In the year of 2018, I lived in Boston in the Charlestown neighborhood with my partner and our German Shepherd. I was 33 years old at the time, and the apartment we rented was on the 4th floor of a building without an elevator. It was a typical low-cost property, located in an area undergoing transformation. The structure of the building is essential to understand this story. It had 12 apartments in total. Mine and the 3 floors below shared the same front entrance, while the other 8 units used a separate entrance. All apartments had balconies in the back, connected to each other by stairs that led to a gate in the back, opening to an alley. From the front entrance hallway, there were windows on the staircase landings that allowed seeing the back balconies and even the back door of my apartment. We had a friendly coexistence with the neighbors, especially those who lived directly below us and shared access through the front entrance. This good relationship was crucial for what happened. It saved me, my partner, and our dog. My partner was in a band and used to travel for performances, staying away for a few days or weeks. I always felt apprehensive during these occasions because I had a complicated past. During my adolescence and early 20s, I was a victim of assaults and stalking by an ex-boyfriend. This history left me constantly worried about the possibility of him reappearing. Shortly before a new tour by my partner, I received a disturbing message on Facebook sent by this ex. It was from a new account, one more of those he used to create. About 7 days later, my car was broken into. The vehicle was searched, the glove compartment was empty, and some objects were scattered around. But the only thing taken was a package of dog treats. Curiously, there were about $20 in coins in the center console, but this money wasn't touched. That left me on full alert. I was terrified at the idea of staying alone while my partner was on tour. He, on the other hand, thought there weren't sufficient reasons to cancel the performances. After all, it was just a bad feeling and some isolated events that, in his view, didn't configure real threats. Besides, car break-ins were incredibly common in Boston. It happened to me more than a dozen times, and the police rarely did anything beyond filing reports by phone. The detail that bothered me was the fact that the thief didn't take the money, something unusual. At that time, there was a homeless man who had started setting up camp on a nearby boulevard, which added another layer of insecurity. With my partner's trip, I took some precautions. I installed cameras and bought locks for the front and back doors. My fear reached a point where I started to invert my sleep schedule, staying awake during the night. This affected even my dog, who began to have diarrhea, perhaps reflecting my high level of stress. Because of this, we needed to go down and up the 4 flights of stairs numerous times, sometimes 6 or 7 times per night. Every time I went out with her, I felt an uncomfortable chill, as if I were being watched. I couldn't discern if this was a product of my fear, or if something was actually happening. Her diarrhea lasted longer than normal, about 3 or 4 days, and this forced me to enter and exit the building many times. I noticed that some neighbors didn't have the habit of fully closing the front door, which left the lock undone. I talked about this with the neighbor from the floor below, mentioning that I was taking extra precautions because of the stalker. He showed empathy, said he would warn the other residents, and after that, I noticed the main door was locked more frequently. My partner returned home around 11 in the morning on a Sunday. Earlier, at about 8:30 a.m., the apartment of the first-floor neighbor had been invaded. He was a metalhead guy, lived alone, and had a collection of musical instruments. Besides that, he sold marijuana and psychedelics from time to time. It seems he went out for breakfast and apparently forgot to lock the door. While he was out, someone entered his apartment. The person ate what they found in the refrigerator, took a coat and a pair of boots, but left behind another coat and dirty boots. They also took my neighbor's college diploma, but ignored $400 that were in the same cabinet. Strangely, all the instruments, sound equipment, and drugs were left untouched, but a set of keys was taken. Among them were the keys to the neighbor's apartment and a master key that opened both the front door and the back gate of the building. Right after the incident, the residents gathered to talk. The second-floor neighbor suggested that the metalhead come tell me about the break-in, considering my history with a stalker. When he knocked on my door, my partner had just arrived from the tour. The fright made me jump, but upon looking through the peephole and recognizing him, I opened the door. We stayed on the entrance staircase while he explained what had happened. We talked for about 15 or 20 minutes. During this time, we heard the front door open and close, but we didn't give it importance. Then, through the window, we saw a man climbing the steps of my back balcony. There was no other apartment he could be going to, and he would have passed by all 11 units in the building to reach mine. I didn't know him, and he wasn't my stalker, but his image was engraved in my memory. He was wearing high black and white sneakers and an enormous black coat that seemed too big for him. When our eyes met through the window, he stopped in the middle of the stairs that led to my balcony. Slowly, he took a cell phone from his pocket and made a call. At the same time, he turned and descended the stairs in a deliberately slow, almost theatrical pace. However, as soon as he reached the balcony below mine, he started running. My neighbor quickly went down to call 911, while my partner and I ran to the back balcony. From there, we saw two vehicles, a sedan and a van with blacked-out windows, departing from a suspicious building 2 houses down. Both cars fled through the alley. We couldn't note the license plates, but the police told us that wouldn't make a difference. There was no concrete evidence or flagrant crime that would justify intercepting the vehicles. They explained this in a condescending manner while taking my statement. Since it was my neighbor who made the call and registered the police report, my partner and I were treated merely as witnesses, which to me was a blessing. What terrified me for a long time was the object my neighbor found when going down the stairs. A piece of wood about 2 feet long with one end shaped like a handle, something resembling a small shovel. After reflecting a lot, I realized that it was actually an improvised battering ram, made to force locks and hinges on doors. When I examined my door later, I noticed that the frame seemed to have been repaired, as if it had already been forced before. Everything indicates they used the master key to enter, positioned the battering ram, and placed someone at the back door ready to intercept me if I tried to escape. The plan seemed to be to return, since they only had one key, break my front entrance, and proceed with what they had planned. Fortunately, we managed to surprise them before they could catch me off guard. I'm almost certain they were watching me, especially during the moments when I went out with my dog. They probably imagined I was alone, and it was pure luck that my partner had arrived 30 minutes before it all happened. I still think today about what could have happened if we had been trapped inside the apartment. Things could have ended in a terrible way. All of us could have been seriously injured or worse. After this, nothing else happened, but the property owner refused to change the locks. The only thing he agreed to was to release us from the rental contract. I decided to leave Boston. Since then, I've adopted a younger dog that I'm training for defense work. My house now is equipped with cameras, spotlights, and surrounded by eccentric neighbors who are an unexpected comfort compared to everything I lived through before. I have a story that's been bothering me. I'm 18 now, but this happened 2 years ago in 2021, when I was still a 16-year-old teenager. It was early afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., and I was returning home after private lessons. During that period, with the pandemic at its peak, schools were operating online. But I needed to pick up some notes from my teacher since an important exam was approaching. Usually, my parents wouldn't let me go out alone because I wasn't very familiar with streets and neighborhoods. However, the teacher lived just over 2 miles away, on a path I knew well, close to our old apartment. That's why they allowed me to go. On the way, I passed by a small stand where they sold pakoras, a popular and inexpensive snack that I always loved. The stand owner was someone I had known since I was little. After getting the notes, I decided to stop there, eat some pakoras, and chat with him a bit. The streets were emptier than usual, with most shops closed and few people passing by. While I was eating, I felt a sudden touch on my hair coming from behind. This startled me. I was wearing a ponytail, and when I turned around, I saw an elderly lady, appearing to be in her 60s, maybe older, smiling at me. She seemed to be living on the streets. She politely asked me to buy her something to eat. Not knowing how to say no, I responded, "Of course, I can do that." I had little money, but I asked the stand owner to give her what was left of my snack. For me, it wasn't something difficult, but when I was saying goodbye, she held my right hand firmly and said, "God bless you, my child. You remind me a lot of my granddaughter. If she could see you, she would be just like you." That made me uncomfortable. I smiled hesitantly and tried to gently remove my hand, but she continued holding it firmly. Then she began to tell me about her life, how she had raised her children with effort while married to a rich but violent and alcoholic man. Despite the abuse, she endured it because of the money. The children grew up, got jobs, and got married. But the husband ended up spending all the fortune on gambling, contracted debts, and died from liver problems. Helpless, she sought help from her children, but was rejected by both, who proved to be greedy and indifferent. She talked nonstop for almost 2 hours. Although I felt empathy, I realized that time was passing quickly, and I began to worry. Moreover, her posture was becoming increasingly strange. She asked where I lived, and unfortunately, I ended up revealing it. Then she asked for my father's name, and I told her that too. The lady then claimed to know him, describing him in a very different way from what I knew. This sounded strange, since my appearance resembled more my mother's. I felt a growing discomfort, and once again tried to release my hand, but she wouldn't let go. She insisted that I go to her house, saying she had sweets to offer me. It was then that I realized that with all the story she had told, it didn't make sense for her to actually take me to a home. A growing fear took over me. I firmly said that I needed to return because my parents would be furious if I was late. I used more force to try to release my wrist, which was still trapped in her grip. She resisted, holding with even more strength, and tried to pull me toward an alley on the street. She continued insisting that I needed to accept her gift as a form of gratitude. In a moment of desperation, I gathered all my strength and finally managed to free my hand. I ran without looking back, straight home. When I arrived, my body was trembling, and I was soaked in cold sweat. Upon telling everything to my parents, they were furious and perplexed at what had happened. It was a difficult situation to explain, but as real as it was frightening. Recently, I went through a complicated situation. I'm 23 years old and work in property management. That day I shouldn't have been alone, but my manager and a colleague called in sick, and the other had taken the day off, something we all forgot. I was worried because the property is located in an area with high crime rates, and I've already had unpleasant experiences there. I had even changed to another position because I didn't feel safe, but they agreed to pay me a significant amount to return, and I ended up giving in. The main door remains unlocked during operating hours. The property is large and very busy. It's difficult to handle alone, especially with so many residents and visitors to attend to. Without a solution, I asked for help from an employee of a partner unit. She agreed but would need to leave before closing time. I accepted, relieved to have someone with me, even if for a limited time. Shortly before we closed for the day, the employee needed to leave. As soon as she left, a nervous man entered carrying a gym bag. He appeared to be homeless and showed signs of mental instability. He approached and handed me his ID. I asked how I could help him, but he only said, "You don't respect veterans." I insisted on knowing what he needed, but he couldn't give me a direct answer. I was starting to lose patience when the colleague, who had taken the day off, appeared to greet me. She quickly noticed something was wrong and came to support me. The man didn't like her presence. He became even more agitated and started rummaging through his bag. Suddenly, he pulled out a piece of female lingerie and threw it on my desk. Then he took out a small box with an SD card and tried to insert it into my computer. I prevented him, but he continued to rummage through his bag, increasingly irritated with our attempts to understand his situation. He repeated that if he couldn't explain to us how we could help him, he would have to leave. The tensest moment came when he pulled out a knife. Immediately, my colleague and I started screaming for him to put the weapon away and leave. He ended up putting the knife away, but refused to leave. I sent a message to my manager, who was at home even though she was sick, asking her to call the police while my colleague escorted him out using an intimidating posture. After some effort, he left, and we immediately locked the doors. The man continued trying to enter again, shouting and cursing at us. After some time, he went to the convenience store next door. It didn't take long for the police to arrive, about 4 patrol cars. We pointed out where he was, and the police quickly approached him. He resisted, became aggressive, and the officers had to forcibly subdue him before taking him away in handcuffs. I warned the police to check his bag, where they found the knife. I confirmed it was the weapon and answered some questions from the authorities. I decided not to press charges since it was evident that it was a mental health crisis, and a prison wouldn't be the solution. He needs proper psychological treatment, not punishment. The prosecutor, however, filed charges on my behalf, and the court issued a protection order for me. Despite this, he was released without paying bail. The last information I received was that he didn't show up for the hearing, and now there is an arrest warrant against him. Honestly, it doesn't surprise me. Since the incident, I haven't seen or heard from him again, and that's what really matters to me now. I'm 21 years old, and in my final year of college in Detroit, Michigan. I live in a somewhat remote area, where the nearest supermarket and fast food place are about 20 minutes from home. I study in a complicated area where the presence of police officers doesn't bother, but rather brings relief, given the number of problems with drug users. I've witnessed situations that are impossible to forget. It's important to make it clear that I don't have any common physical issues. I'm 6 feet 1 inch tall, weigh 245 pounds, most of it muscle. Although I know I could lose about 15 pounds or more. I really enjoy smoking, drinking, and eating. Like any good student, I chose a solid career, accounting. I do an internship at a medium-sized public relations company, working with accounting and receiving $14 per hour. College is expensive, so to supplement my income, I deliver pizzas at night after my shift. The pizzeria is simple, with low prices and an absurdly large delivery range, about 20 minutes from my house and 5 from the beach. I live north of the place, and deliveries cover up to 50 minutes beyond my house. At the moment, I'm writing this at work, between reviewing contractual clauses to ensure clients are being charged correctly. And believe me, they always try to find a way to come out ahead. But anyway, the further north you go from the pizzeria, the more rural the scenery becomes. I work until closing, usually around 9:45 p.m. Last night, while folding pizza boxes, the attendant appeared with a delivery order. She commented that the customer seemed strange on the phone, as if speaking with a full mouth or through a ventilator, and the sound resembled a gurgle. With my experience in Detroit, I immediately thought of someone under the influence of drugs. But in this area, it's more likely to be some medication-induced madness. Sensing that something unusual was about to happen, I took the address. It was practically in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't very excited because driving there would be a pain, but I accepted. Besides, the order was quite weird. A large pizza full of extra ingredients, anchovies, ground beef, ham, sausage, pepperoni, about $30 just in add-ons. I went to ask the attendant if it was correct, and she replied that she thought so. She wasn't sure because she barely understood the call, so she did what she could. Since she's only about 16 years old, I let it go, thinking she might have been distracted. I decided to call back to confirm. The phone rang 5, 10, 20, 30 times, and it was answered. I hung up and tried again. This time, the call went straight to, "The number you dialed has not set up a voicemail." Goodbye. Okay then, my manager made the pizza anyway, and we followed the order. I went out to deliver a pizza to an incredibly funny guy because he was so big and tall, and shortly afterward to a couple who invited me to drink. I thanked them but declined. I don't drink or smoke when I'm working. I returned, hoping someone had already delivered that strange order. But to my surprise, or rather my misfortune, no one had. So there I went to pick up the pizza and put it in the car with reluctance. I put the address in the GPS. It was on a side street, near a park known to residents as open space. Despite the name, it's a huge forested area of about 500 acres. The place is practically at the limit of our delivery area, about 25 minutes from there. I started my Subaru Turbo, put on some electronic music, and began to drive. If you don't know rural regions, it's hard to explain, but winter in the forest is unsettling. There's absolutely no sound, unless something bigger than a cat is moving around. It's just you, total silence, and that feeling of being watched. I finally reached the address. The street has a few houses, but they're well apart from each other, with lots that seem to be at least 5 acres. I'm looking for number 1134. I pass by 1130, then a long stretch of deserted road. The numbering starts again at 1140. Great. I just want to end this quickly and get another delivery without getting into trouble. I try to call their number again. The phone rings several times and suddenly stops. For a moment, I'm speechless. Someone answered but doesn't speak. I only hear a buzz, something between a hiss and a muffled sound. I turn up the sound in the car, and the noise increases so much that I immediately turn it off to avoid damaging the speakers. The windows start to fog up, and stopped between 2 houses, I decide to lower the windows. That's when a horrible smell like rotting garbage invades the car. It seems like the kind of odor you find when passing through rundown areas of the city. It's unbearable. I engage first gear and head towards the next house to try to escape this. At the end of the driveway, I see a stone with a light on top. I decide to knock on the door of that house and ask if perhaps they had given the wrong number when ordering. This would be quite typical of such customers. I approach slowly, about 30 meters away. When I step out of the darkness and enter the illuminated entrance area, I feel an enormous relief. Finally, the customer. I expected to find a completely out-of-it guy, stumbling or with strange behavior, but he seemed surprisingly calm. I parked the car about 10 feet from him. He was wearing a huge coat, about 3 sizes too big for him. Despite this, he was quite tall, probably about 4 inches taller than me. I avoid staring at him directly at first. I get out of the car, grab the pizza, and prepare the change in case he's paying in cash. I say, "Sir, sorry for the delay and the calls. The delivery was far." He doesn't respond. I get suspicious. That strong smell is still in the air, but it's not garbage collection day. I put the pizza on the car roof and look at him again, this time more attentively. Finally, I can observe him properly. The guy is enormous, practically a giant. He's barefoot, wearing torn jeans with stains spread all over. I try to focus on his face, but his eyes are sunken, as if the pupils had disappeared, leaving only black holes. With the dim light, it seems like I'm looking at craters. The feeling of discomfort grows with each second. He still hasn't moved or said anything. I interrupt what I'm doing and stare at him. He returns the stare, fixed and disturbing, with those shadowy eyes. His head oscillates from side to side, but in an erratic way, as if it were stuck, moving in small jerks, like a car door that's jammed and needs an extra push to close. I observe the irregular movement of his head for about 10 seconds, unable to look away. Between the horrible smell, the strange movements, the frightening eyes, and his complete silence, I feel my unease reach its peak. My mind is racing. I maintain eye contact while I take my cell phone from my pocket, holding it next to the car roof to be able to alternate my gaze between the screen and the man. Out of pure curiosity, I dial the number that had called before. The phone starts ringing, but the sound doesn't come from the expected direction. I wait for a second, and then I hear it. It's coming from the forest. In the midst of that deep silence, I hear the muffled sound of a cell phone ringing about 50 meters among the trees. Panic fully sets in. The only thing I can think of is how this situation could get worse. I look at the guy again. He's still standing there, swinging his head irregularly. And then something hits me like a punch. He's smiling. I take a deep breath and gather courage to speak. "Can you take this, please? And look, I think you dropped your phone in the forest or something while you were, I don't know, hiding a body or something like that." The last sentence comes out with a nervous laugh, as if I were trying to convince myself that it was all just a misunderstanding. But his smile remains. His mouth finally opens, and he emits a low, strange guttural sound, followed by a more acute grunt, like a person trying to clear their throat. I already have one foot on the driver's seat, ready to flee, when he finally speaks. That phone isn't his. The pause between phone isn't and his is far too long, which makes the words even more disturbing. The first part sounds like a single slurred word, and his comes out with a higher tone, almost shouted. My entire body is on maximum alert, a mixture of fear and confusion. My legs feel weak, and I'm one step away from fainting. I push the pizza to the opposite side of the roof, as far as possible from me, and finally manage to stammer, "Sir, you're scaring me. I have a .45 and less than $30 with me. Just take this and let me go." Upon hearing this, the swinging of his head suddenly stops. He stares at me, those black eyes seeming to pierce my soul. Then his mouth opens again. It was his. My brain is overloaded. I can only ask, dazed, "His what?" "The phone was his," he repeats while advancing a step in my direction. He doesn't walk normally. He seems to be propelled by spasms, as if his body were being pulled by a strange force. "The phone was his," he repeats once more. My fear reaches an unbearable limit. I'm almost crying. He jumps again, closer to the car now. The phone is no longer his. At first, I can't say anything, just babble without meaning. But then I find the strength to shout, "I'm going to call the police if you don't get out of here." I see the man sketch that disturbing smile. The strangest thing is that without moving his lips, I hear a different voice, something I've never heard before. Go away. Stop following me. I'm going to call the police. With a sudden movement, he stretches out his hand, grabs the pizza from the car roof, and leaves a few quarters in its place. Only later do I realize they're covered by a dark, thick liquid that spreads over the metal. I don't think twice. I get in the car, drive away without looking back, and accelerate down the road. The pizza's thermal cover stayed there, as well as the car door that I didn't even have time to completely close. I drive like a madman, reaching something like 80 miles per hour for about a quarter mile. The adrenaline makes me turn around because, in my desperation, I fear getting even more lost. I return along the road where I had been, but he's no longer there. I finally reach the end of the path and see a stop sign before entering the main road. I look to the right, making sure no one is coming, and turn left. I almost have a heart attack. That thing's face is mere inches from my window. I don't think. I simply accelerate and dash down the road. I arrive at the pizzeria, trembling from head to toe. I get out of the car, and for the first time at work, smoke a cigarette to try to calm down. When I finally enter, the attendant, with that casual tone that doesn't match at all what I had just experienced, says, "Hey, the guy from the open space house just called back. He said you forgot some food, but he only ordered the pizza, right? He wants you to go back." Tears start to flow before I can respond. I take my phone, which had fallen in the car during the escape, and see 14 missed calls from that number. I listen to the voice messages. The first ones are in complete silence, but in the last one, there's just an irregular breathing and those same low grunts that make my skin crawl. I cry in front of the attendant, who, despite being pretty, doesn't diminish the weight of the moment. I sit in a chair and stay there for about 10 minutes, trying to compose myself. Then I remember the change he had left on the car roof. I go out with heavy steps and a flashlight in hand. When I illuminate the car, I see that the roof is covered with a thick, sticky substance with a strong copper smell. I can't hold my stomach and vomit between the rear window and the trunk. The 25-cent coins are stuck in this goo, and next to them, I notice a small piece of strange, soft tissue. I open the car door and am petrified. There's a line of that same viscous liquid starting on the dashboard and going to the driver's door. He tried to open the door while he was beside me at the stop sign. I return to the pizzeria, crying even more. I ask the attendant to call the number again, but the calls go straight to voicemail. The next morning, I give the number to my uncle, who is a police captain in several cities around here. He investigates and discovers it's a disposable cell phone purchased with cash, impossible to track. The phone seems to be turned off now. Today, I can only sleep with the lights on. Curiosity has a way of guiding us down paths we never imagined. Sometimes these paths intersect with the unexpected, events that challenge our logic and shake reality as we know it. Imagine being in the prime of your youth, immersed in personal discoveries and studies, when something completely extraordinary erupts into your life, transforming everything. This is my story. When I turned 22, I was completing my third year at a prestigious university in Vermont. Being a full-time student and having recently undergone my second back surgery, I was temporarily living with my parents in our colonial home near the edge of the forest. I needed physical support, and the unconditional help from my family was something for which I felt profoundly grateful. During this period, I devoted considerable time to exploring different spiritual paths. Sacred geometry had become one of my greatest passions. I was enchanted by the idea that these patterns could compose the entire structure of the universe. One morning, my sister called our mother, sharing the news that she and her boyfriend, with whom she had been together for over 4 years, had broken up. He would keep the apartment they rented in a nearby town, leaving her without a place to stay. She immediately decided to return home while looking for a new place. I was sad about the end of her relationship, but pleased with the opportunity for us to spend more time together. On the eve of her arrival, I went to sleep as usual. I've always been a heavy sleeper, so it was strange to wake up suddenly in the middle of the night. Before me hovered a luminous sphere the size of a baseball. Although it was intensely bright, as if condensing the light of the sun, it didn't hurt my eyes. The vision was both dazzling and terrifying. While admiring that almost surreal presence, a deep, paralyzing fear took hold of me. In my mind, a voice insisted, "This is God. This is God." Curiously, I had never been religious, nor did I believe in God in traditional terms. I always imagined that if I encountered a superior force, it would be something enveloped in love and serenity. However, the experience was anything but that. I sat up in bed and looked around. The sphere's glow illuminated my entire room, and everything seemed too real to be a dream. Suddenly, the sphere spoke. The voice was deep, metallic, and imposing, a masculine tone, but not that of an ordinary man. Each word carried an undeniable weight. "People you love will die." The phrase made me shudder with terror. Tears streamed down as a feeling of powerlessness took over me. Mentally, I questioned, what can I do to protect them? The sphere, as if reading my thoughts, responded firmly, "You must accept this. It is their fate, and you cannot intervene." Shortly after these words, I felt as if my body was left behind. My vision was taken by a succession of scenes from around the world. At first, I saw magnificent landscapes. Mountains in the desert, monks in orange robes, a woman giving birth, the pyramids of Egypt. However, the scenario changed abruptly, bringing images of suffering. Starving children, violence against animals, wars, nuclear explosions. It was as if the planet was being destroyed before my eyes. Finally, everything plunged into darkness. Over that void emerged complex mathematical equations and geometric patterns in constant transformation, like an infinite kaleidoscope. That morning, I woke up with no memory of what had occurred just hours before. The day began like any other. I attended a summer course class, went shopping, and even stopped by the market to pick up ingredients for dinner. Around 6 in the evening, I was in the kitchen, excited about my sister's imminent arrival. Riders on the Storm was playing on the radio when she entered, accompanied by my mother. My father, who was on the phone in his office, appeared and asked my mother to go there. Moments later, we heard a heart-wrenching scream capable of chilling the bones. The instant that sound traveled through the house, all memories of the sphere returned to my mind like an avalanche. It was at that moment that I was certain something terrible had happened. My parents entered the kitchen, and with faces marked by pain, told me something devastating. Two close relatives had died in a tragic accident with their RV while traveling along the coast highway. A blowout in the front tire caused the propane tank to explode, engulfing the vehicle in flames within seconds. My great-aunt, who had been quadriplegic since the early 90s due to a botched surgery, was in the vehicle. Her husband, my great-uncle, desperately tried to get her out of there, but the fire spread too quickly. The two couldn't escape. They had been married for nearly 60 years, a passionate and inseparable couple, the kind that only exists in the most sincere stories. When their bodies were recovered, they were embracing, as if they had chosen to face the end together. Even years later, I continue to be intrigued by the entity that alerted me about this imminent tragedy. Throughout life, I've gone through other strange and inexplicable events, but this one haunts me the most. I cannot comprehend who or what was that sphere. It's worth noting that I wasn't under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time. I share this experience with the hope that someone, somewhere knows something more about the being I encountered. I'm an atheist and have always been skeptical about the supernatural. Despite this encounter was not only the most disturbing I've ever lived, but also completely destroyed the way I viewed reality. This is a story my father shared with me. I never questioned whether spirits are real or not, but this episode profoundly marked our family. Here's some context. In the late 70s, my parents had one of those vintage Winnebago campers they used for work. They moved around as my father's job in telecommunications required. At the time, my older brother was 6 years old, and the second was only 3 months old. My mother, 25 then, was a stay-at-home mom caring for the boys. She had put them to sleep and was washing dishes when something strange happened. A familiar perfume filled the air. At first, she thought it was the scent of the roses my father had given her a day or two before. She soon realized it was different. It was her grandmother's perfume. At that moment, she felt a presence behind her. When she turned around, she didn't see a physical person, but something that seemed to manifest in her mind. Without a doubt, it was her grandmother. Curiously, there were 2 other figures beside her, but my mother couldn't identify who they were. For more context, my mother was raised by her father, a long-haul truck driver who was almost never home, and by an abusive stepmother. Her grandmother was her refuge, a figure who did everything possible to make her feel loved and overcome the challenges of childhood. Her grandmother had a generous heart and always helped whoever she could. During the oil crisis of the 70s, she offered work and a hot meal to anyone who knocked on her door, even when she didn't need help. My father told me that at some point, she and her grandmother had talked about what happens after death. They made a pact. Whoever passed away first would send a sign to the other about the existence of something beyond this life. They took this promise seriously. On that day, when my mother saw her grandmother and the figures beside her, she heard, as if telepathically, the confirmation that there is life after death. The figures appeared from the northwest and disappeared toward the southeast. About an hour later came a call from a relative. The news was clear. Her grandmother had passed away exactly 1 hour before. I have no doubts that there is something much greater that transcends our time here. My father never spoke about this experience lightly, and he's not one to exaggerate or make up stories. The way his voice quivers slightly when he tells it, even decades later, makes me certain that it happened exactly as he described. What strikes me most about this story is how it changed my father's perspective on life and death. He was a pragmatic aerospace engineer before this incident. Afterward, he became more open to discussing spirituality, though he never joined any organized religion. He simply carries this quiet certainty that consciousness continues beyond our physical existence. I've often wondered about those other two figures that appeared with his grandmother. Were they guides, angels, other departed family members, or perhaps beings from a dimension we can't comprehend in our current state? Whatever the answer, this story has brought comfort to our family during times of loss. It reminds us that the connections we forge with our loved ones don't simply vanish when their physical bodies do. They continue, perhaps transformed, in ways we might not fully understand until it's our turn to cross that threshold. Since childhood, the house where I grew up was the stage for events that always seemed out of the ordinary. I saw things, normally animals that ran or appeared to fly. On some occasions, frightening faces emerged on the walls. But above all, it was the overwhelming sensation of being watched when I was alone that bothered me most, bringing with it a fear difficult to explain. As I grew older, these experiences intensified. I began to see human figures and hear what seemed like a crowd of people talking. One night, I woke up and came face to face with a skeletal figure hanging in the corner of the room, while laughter echoed around. Over time, I began to witness these things during the day as well, silhouettes lurking from illuminated doorways, staring at me fixedly. Whenever I opened a door, I was certain I would find someone, although there was never anyone there. In the last years of high school, even being religious, I adopted a more skeptical view of these occurrences. I convinced myself they were shadows, perhaps a mistake of my eyes, or my imagination playing tricks. When I moved to college in Massachusetts, the occurrences disappeared. I slept better, stopped worrying about the darkness, and the shadows that previously appeared in the corner of my vision became rare. However, when I returned home for summer vacation to our colonial-era house in Connecticut, everything returned with even greater intensity. One night, while playing guitar and singing in my room, I stopped abruptly. A sound of hoarse, loud, and heavy breathing was coming from outside the door. It was one of the most frightening nights I've ever experienced. I tried to escape, seeking refuge by driving somewhere. But as soon as I left, I had the distinct feeling that the trees were watching me. An inexplicable impulse made me turn back. Returning to the house, I noticed glowing eyes in the yard, fixed on me. When I tried to identify what it was, I found no animal. Cats that usually pass by there weren't in sight. Feeling vulnerable, I went to my room, knelt, and began to pray. I proclaimed, with all the courage I could gather, that any spirit present there had no power over me. Immediately, I felt a change. Something menacing seemed to approach, but then stopped and just stood there, watching. After completing college, I returned home. During the university years, I had completely moved away from the church, the result of a loss of faith. But facing an especially difficult period, I began attending a local Episcopal church and developed a close relationship with the rectors. My hope was that with constant prayers, I could cleanse whatever was present in my house, but the occurrences persisted. One night I woke up and saw something frightening. A strange creature crawling on the ceiling that suddenly disappeared into the walls. On another occasion, my alarm clock captured sounds of heavy breathing and snoring. Upon listening to one of these recordings, I noticed a very distinct whistle that happened exactly at 2:13 in the morning. I was alone downstairs, and no one in my family has the habit of whistling. I shared this with my rector, who suggested performing a kind of exorcism. After consulting with the bishop of the diocese, he came to my house and performed the Episcopal blessing. He gently anointed the doors with oil, blessed each room, and made specific prayers for me and the house, asking that any present spirit be expelled. As soon as the blessing ended, the house seemed different. It was as if the environment had become lighter, almost happy. Since then, the strange experiences ceased. Even the creaking that was common in the 300-year-old structure disappeared. Many people ask me if other members of my family went through something similar. I talked with my parents, who didn't report anything specific. However, they mentioned that on some occasions, the climate of the house seemed loaded with hatred, usually directed at them. My father, who is a historian with conservative opinions, believes that his position in the predominantly left-leaning academic field may have generated considerable hostility. I didn't get around to asking my siblings if they had similar experiences, but most had already moved out when this happened. We don't know much about the history of the house. The previous owner was very poorly regarded by the neighbors, which raises suspicions that he might have been involved in something out of the ordinary. That's my story. It's interesting to share it and hear reports from other people. Many believe, but what surprised me was the number of people, religious or not, who said they identified with what I experienced. The house still stands today, and occasionally I drive by it. From the outside, it looks serene and inviting, the perfect New England postcard. But I know what lurked within those walls, and I've never stepped foot inside since the blessing. For years I wondered if the memories might fade, or if I'd start to question whether what I experienced was real. But the opposite has happened. With each passing year, the memories grow more vivid, the feelings more intense. I'm certain that what I encountered wasn't just in my mind. There was something there, something ancient and malevolent, something that didn't want us in that house. And sometimes, on cold nights when I'm alone, I still feel watched, as if whatever was in that house found a way to follow me, even after all these years. It was nearly midnight, and I was on the subway with Veronica. While we chatted, I mentioned that my destination was Pioneer Square. She joked, saying it wasn't a good idea to announce where I was going, as it might attract some stalker. Although I laughed and played along with the joke, I was left with a slight feeling of discomfort. Thinking about it now, I believe that's where it all began. The subway car was practically empty. 3 men were conversing. 2 were close to each other, while the third maintained a certain distance. I don't know if this has any relevance, but it's a detail I recall. Besides them, I don't remember anyone else at that moment. When I got off, Veronica continued to the next stop. I paid my fare, and while doing so, I called her to complain jokingly about the 50-cent increase in the fare. After talking a bit, I headed down toward the platform for the light rail that went to Pioneer Square. I noticed a girl seated a few feet from me. Her presence caught my attention, although I don't recall having seen her on the subway before. Now, thinking better, it's strange how she got to the station without me noticing her on the way. The girl seemed very young, between 11 and 17 years old. It was late at night, almost 1 in the morning, and she was alone, petite and thin. She had her hair cut in a blunt bob, gray, which looked more like a rigid and shiny helmet than real hair. Perhaps it was a wig. As for her face and clothes, I can't remember, despite having stared fixedly at her at one point for more than 20 minutes. Her style was striking, somewhat alternative. She probably wore a jacket, perhaps leather or denim. She remained a few feet away from me, but her presence had something disturbing about it. When the train arrived, she crossed the short distance to enter exactly the same car as me, which made me uncomfortable. During the journey, I avoided looking at her. That's when things began to turn strange. At Pioneer Square Station, I got off the light rail heading toward the ferry. The boat was already departing, and I had to run not to miss it. Another person was also running to board with me. When I entered, I saw the gray-haired girl seated a few rows ahead of me, looking directly at me. I recognized her instantly, but there was something incomprehensible. How did she get to the ferry before me, coming from the same light rail if the timing was so tight? I don't remember seeing her running with me. When I spotted her on the ferry, my relief at having managed to board quickly transformed into pure despair. Just remembering her black eyes and her expression, devoid of any emotion, brings a lump to my throat. It was something that didn't seem even remotely human, an absence of life and naturalness that I had never witnessed before. Then suddenly and horribly, her expression distorted into a cruel and macabre smile. It was the most terrifying vision of my life. I can't help the tears when remembering how she got there, coming from the same light rail without me seeing her. During the 30 minutes it took the ferry to cross the water, I kept my gaze fixed on her. It was impossible that I was imagining 30 entire minutes. Even now, I wonder if my mind might have exaggerated, perhaps transformed her eyes and smile into something more sinister than they really were. But at the same time, I can't imagine that my mind invented her constant presence during the entire crossing. The reality of seeing her seated there, motionless and staring at me, is something I cannot ignore. When the ferry finally docked, I waited for everyone to leave before me. I didn't see her anymore after disembarking, but the sensation of profound fear accompanied me during the entire journey to my apartment in a high-rise building overlooking Puget Sound. It's as if she disappeared into thin air. The more I think about her appearance, the more confused my memory becomes. The gray hair that looked like a helmet, the extremely pale skin, the black eyes, the emptiness of the gaze that transformed into that unbearable smile. These details haunt me. She seemed to wear clothes similar to mine, something alternative. And most disturbing, her gray hair was very similar to mine. It was as if she was trying to reflect my image. There was something terribly wrong with her. It wasn't just the absence of humanity, but also something that separated her even from animals, something lifeless. The more I think, the more I wonder if this really happened. What else could be real? Why was she following me? What was the purpose? I've relived this memory countless times over the years. On the night it happened, I ran to my roommate's room at 3 in the morning and told her everything. After that, I never shared it with anyone until now. Sometimes I still wake in the middle of the night, convinced I can see that gray-haired figure standing in the darkest corner of my bedroom. That inhuman smile gradually spreading across her face. Last month, I was heading home on the light rail when I saw a young woman with the same gray bob haircut board at University Street Station. My heart nearly stopped until she turned around, and I could see she was just a normal college student with dyed hair. But for weeks afterward, I took Ubers home instead of public transit. I can't shake the feeling that someday, somewhere, I'll turn around and see her again. That girl who wasn't a girl at all, but something else entirely. Something wearing human form like an ill-fitting costume. For several months, I had been working unusual hours. It was common for me to be active until noon or beyond 1 in the morning. When I finally returned home, it was already quite late. That night began in a peculiar way. A colleague dropped me off near my house, as usual, and when I turned onto my street, I came face to face with 5 police officers and a neighbor. The entire length of the street was cordoned off with yellow tape. You can't enter. There was a shooting. A man is in critical condition at the hospital, and our ballistics team is combing the area, explained one of the officers. I don't think the shooting had any connection with what happened afterward, but I wanted to share how everything started. For 3 hours, I stood there smoking cigarettes with my neighbor and complaining about the delay in allowing our entry. Finally, after 3 in the morning, the police finished their investigation and allowed us to go home. As soon as I entered, my 2 dogs began to bark uncontrollably. After calming them down, I decided to grab a cold beer to relax. Usually, I would have 2 after work just to relieve the day's stress. Working in a microbrewery, I dealt with a lot of noise, coffee, and cigarettes to endure the shift. So even when I arrived late, my mind was still racing at 1,000 miles an hour. I placed the beer at the edge of the kitchen table and turned on the TV, which was mounted on the wall. Then I opened my laptop at the other end of the table and finally sat down. About 15 minutes passed while I browsed the internet and changed TV channels until I remembered the beer I had forgotten. Damn, I muttered to myself. I hate when they get warm. It was at that exact moment, as I looked at the still unopened can, that it began to slide rapidly across the table. It traveled almost 6 feet in a straight line in my direction, and as it approached me, it made an abrupt movement to the right, stopping exactly beside my left hand, next to the laptop. The movement was clear, something like an L. The beer moved about 5 feet forward, and then about 1 foot to the side, touching my hand. I was paralyzed. I just stared at the can in disbelief for about 15 seconds, with my heart racing. When I finally managed to process what had happened, I ran upstairs entered my mother's room like a madman and began to shout. It was almost 3:30 in the morning. Naturally, she was irritated and barely paid attention to my story, which is understandable since I woke her up in such an abrupt way. Later, I inspected the table and tried to find some logical explanation, but it was impossible. The can had slid in a way that seemed to be dragged with force, as if an invisible hand had moved it. To this day, I get goosebumps when I think about it. I still live in the same Brooklyn apartment, and I can still visualize the scene perfectly, like a recorded replay burned into my memory. The way the beer moved wasn't natural. It was too precise, too intentional to be explained by any kind of tilt in the table or condensation underneath the can. Since that night, I've tried to recreate the conditions. I've placed cans in the exact same spot, checked the table's level, even had a structural engineer friend examine the building for subtle shifts that might cause vibrations. Nothing. There is absolutely no explanation for what I witnessed. What bothers me most isn't just the moving can itself, but the timing. It moved precisely when I mentioned it getting warm, almost as if something was listening to me and decided to be helpful. Or perhaps it was mocking me. Either way, I know what I saw, and no amount of scientific explanation has been able to convince me otherwise. I still drink beer at that table, but I never leave a can unattended anymore. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the apartment, I swear I can feel something watching me from the corners of the room. Something waiting for another opportunity to let me know it's there. Before this experience, I didn't believe in these things. My routine is quite practical. I manage a salvage business in winter, and in other seasons, I buy and resell cars. I also dismantle vehicles that are beyond repair, especially luxury ones, as they usually bring a good return. There's a detail that few know. If something serious, like a crime, occurs inside a car, be it a shooting or even pepper spray, the vehicle almost always becomes a total loss. This happens because the cost of hiring a specialized team to clean crime scenes and then restore the vehicle's interior is too high for insurance companies. There's even a federal regulation requiring that cars exposed to blood or other fluids be cleaned by professionals before going to repair shops, ensuring the safety of workers against viruses like HIV or hepatitis C. Therefore, a car involved in an accident or crime, depending on the amount of blood present and where it's located, may be discarded. These vehicles, considered a total loss, end up in the hands of contractors for insurance companies who try to recover part of the loss by selling them to businesses or people like me. Once resold, however, these cars can be cleaned in an amateur way without the need for specialized companies, since worker exposure is no longer an issue. It seems like an absurd loophole, I know. I learned to deal with blood and biological remains by asking forensic cleaning professionals and observing their work. I have family in law enforcement, which facilitated my contact with these practices. Some cars I bought had heavy histories. There were cases of murders, suicides, and even police interventions. I've acquired vehicles where clearly someone lost their life. I sold parts from them, or in some cases, cleaned and resold the cars themselves. A notable case was in January of 2018. when I bought a Chevy Silverado High Country 2015 model for a very low price. The vehicle, valued between $40,000 and $50,000 due to its mileage, went for just $800 and some change. The reason: someone had been killed in the front seat. The truck arrived from Arizona during a cold and snowy day. I placed it in the garage, but I was too busy with snow removal to immediately work on it. Since it was parked there, I had a strange sensation, as if there was someone nearby. You know that perception that there's someone in the other room, although everything is silent. When I finally began to dismantle the parts stained with blood and brain matter, I placed everything in appropriate bags for biological waste. The work was slow and meticulous. I couldn't risk spreading dried blood around the environment. It took about 2 weeks to clean it enough to feel safe touching the truck without using protective equipment. I dismantled the entire interior except for the dashboard and removed the doors to facilitate the removal of the seats. 2 of the doors, which had gunshot marks, were discarded. One day, while adjusting the heater of my daily car in the garage, I heard a male laugh. It was clear but strange. I live in such an isolated region that the only person who occasionally appears is the mailman. I thought it was my brother playing some prank, hidden behind one of the trucks. "James, give me a hand here with this cable." No response. I raised my head, looked around, but saw no one. I walked to the garage door, which was still locked. The laugh had been real, but not understanding. I decided to ignore it and return to work. While circulating near the truck, I saw a man behind it. He was dressed in jeans, a black short-sleeved shirt, and a crooked blue cap. He looked in my direction, made a gesture with his head, and disappeared behind one of my snow plow trucks. I was paralyzed with fear. That wasn't imagination. There was no possibility of hallucination. My garage doesn't have gas leaks. The engines had been off for hours, and I use sensitive carbon monoxide alarms that trigger even with little running time of the vehicles. I have no history of delusions, nor do I use drugs or alcohol. The house has also never presented problems with radon gas or electricity. The only explanation I can conceive is that I saw the owner of the truck. After selling it, the presence that accompanied me for months in the garage disappeared completely. I didn't feel anything negative while that man was there, just a constant impression of being watched. Why did he appear? Why did he nod? I don't know, but it's something I'll never forget. The truck was sold to an acquaintance from school days. Different from what I usually do, I didn't dismantle it. I sold the entire vehicle. I was honest with the buyer and told him what had happened there. He accepted and still uses the truck, as shown by some posts on Facebook to this day. Fortunately, none of the photos I've seen includes our friend in jeans and a cap. I still wonder about that man sometimes. Was he checking to see what happened to his truck? Was he confused about where he was? Or was there something more purposeful in his appearance? The nod seemed almost appreciative, like he was thanking me for handling his vehicle with respect, despite its gruesome history. The strangest part is that after researching the truck's history more thoroughly, I discovered the original owner wasn't killed in the vehicle at all. He'd sold it a month before his death, which occurred during a home invasion. The person killed in the truck was the new owner, a young woman who'd been targeted by her ex-boyfriend. Yet the apparition was unmistakably male, matching photos I later found of the original owner. Why would his spirit be attached to a vehicle he no longer owned? What connection kept him tethered to that Silverado rather than the place of his actual death? These questions haunt me far more than the brief encounter itself, and I've never found satisfactory answers to any of them. I've had experiences with mushrooms, LSD, and other substances, so I know what a trip is like and how incredible they can be. I'm not religious. About 28 years ago, I suffered an accident that left me in critical condition. I was taken by ambulance to the hospital on the verge of death. I remember hearing an irregular heartbeat while I cried. After that, I blacked out. There was darkness, and then it gave way to a magnificent forest, full of ferns and immense redwoods. I no longer felt my body, but the sensation was welcoming, full of positivity. Leaving out the more subtle details, I saw a path that seemed to have been made just for me, as it began exactly where I was. It went straight until ending in a circular space that didn't exist before. When I reached the end, a light descended, accompanied by the most intense sensation of unconditional love and understanding. It's difficult to explain these emotions. I don't think something similar exists here. I conversed with an entity and other beings, and I recall having received answers, although I'll omit the details to keep the story brief. I awakened some time later in the ICU. I had been operated on and spent weeks in the hospital. Upon receiving discharge, something in me had changed. It was as if my life had turned upside down for the better. I felt a profound inner peace. With this new motivation, I returned to studies and graduated from high school as an adult. Then I went on to college. Since that day, I never doubted the existence of something beyond life, although I also never tried to convince anyone. I kept this experience as something reserved, a valuable secret. 28 years later, I experienced DMT for the first time. I knew that many people reported encounters with entities and spoke of a positive and unique experience. I prepared the pipe carefully, not knowing exactly how much to use. After years of reading about the subject, I wanted to go as far as possible. On the last puff, the atoms seemed to vibrate around me, making everything almost transparent. I closed my eyes. I'll get straight to the point. I interacted with 3 entities, but 2 of them were especially striking. One in particular had a flat form, as if it were 2-dimensional. There were other beings around, but one stood out, and to this day, I can clearly visualize its presence. During our interaction, it created a kind of rectangular box with strings that moved up and down. Despite not feeling my body, I knew I was communicating with it. Slowly, it pushed this box toward what I somehow perceived as my right side. The curious thing is that my mind was totally lucid, which made me certain that this wasn't just another trip. Whatever it was, it seemed to love me, and I thought, this is something real. What happened next caught me by surprise. Before even seeing it, I felt the presence of the last entity. When I finally saw it, I was overcome by a wave of happiness and joy that I couldn't contain. I'm 46 years old, and I've only cried about 4 times since becoming an adult. But at that moment, my God, the simple tears wouldn't stop. The entity had a translucent, dazzling form, filled with a vibrant shade of purple or something that seemed to glow from within. The instant it appeared, a realization hit me. I knew that being forever. It was the same sensation of unconditional love and happiness that I experienced in my previous encounter, without a shadow of a doubt. During our communication, I heard again the words that were told to me when I was 22 years old. Don't worry. It was as if everything made sense in such a profound way that it seemed to resolve something within me. No experience I've had with drugs came close to expressing this level of meaning and emotion. This was communication on a level far beyond anything else. It may seem like madness, but my mind was completely clear. It was as if the DMT wasn't altering my cognition. I just accepted what was being shown. I saw that forest again in my mind, and the entity seemed to say, "Look, see." It was me. It was insane, but so real. The tears streamed down my face, and I keep thinking about the image my friend must have had of me at that moment. The sensation of knowing that being forever was unshakable. It was as if we were reminiscing old memories together. In my mind came images of worn boots, wooden docks, and ships. The impression was that we had already lived that before, in some other time. And then came the clarity. It was the same being that I encountered when I was on the verge of death. There's much more about this entity, but I don't think I can put everything into words now. When the effects of DMT began to dissipate, peace took over again. It was as if something in me had been renewed, like guidance that brought me serenity. I was happier than I had ever been before. I don't know what all this means, but I have no doubt that it was real. It may seem like madness, but it was something that nourished my soul. And I know deep down that the DMT entity was the same one that accompanied me in that near-death experience. That encounter changed everything for me. I'd spent nearly 3 decades trying to rationalize my near-death experience, convincing myself it was just my oxygen-deprived brain creating comforting hallucinations. But this reunion shattered that comfortable explanation. The being knew things about me, about my life since the accident, that couldn't be explained by random drug-induced visions. In the months since that DMT experience, I've found myself drawn to quantum physics theories about consciousness and the nature of reality. I've started meditating daily, something I'd always dismissed before. Not because I'm seeking religious enlightenment, but because I'm certain now that our conscious experience extends beyond our physical bodies in ways science hasn't yet fully mapped. I don't share this story often. People tend to dismiss these experiences as drug delusions, or the desperate meaning-making of a mind that once faced death. But those who have been there, who have glimpsed behind the curtain of our physical reality, they understand. There's something more to our existence than what we can measure and quantify. And sometimes, if we're fortunate, we get a reminder from old friends that we're never truly alone in this cosmic journey. It seems that working as a real estate agent reserves more than unusual stories. For privacy reasons, I've changed the clients' names to Richard and Emma. After months of searching for a home, they finally found a house that matched what they wanted and their budget. Excited, we scheduled a visit for 7 in the evening. I arrived 15 minutes early to turn on the lights, since it darkened quickly, and also to check the place out. Right away, the house impressed me. The price seemed almost too low, maybe 30,000 below the real value, which is rare. I already imagined they would be interested, so I did a quick inspection to see if there was something that devalued the property so much. Walking through the house, I saw an intercom in the hallway near the kitchen. I pressed it and heard the sound coming from the basement. I found it interesting. It felt like a scene from a movie. I then proceeded to the kitchen, where I noticed that the refrigerator was open. I found it strange, but deduced that the seal might be bad or that some previous agent had forgotten to close it. I went to push it, but it was well closed. This only intrigued me more, but I continued exploring. While thinking about this, the intercom began to buzz. A static sound echoed from the basement. I decided to go there and check. The basement was dark, with only a pull string to turn on the light. Even so, the clarity from the small windows made the path visible. As I approached the light, I heard the intercom buzz again. This time, the sound came from upstairs. I turned on the lamp and went up quickly to see what was happening in the kitchen. I felt a chill. All the cabinets, drawers, and the refrigerator were wide open, as if someone had just rummaged through them. My heart raced as I tried to process that. The phone rang. Richard and Emma had just arrived. I ran to close everything, trying to disguise my nervousness. When I received them, Richard asked if I was okay. Apparently, I wasn't hiding my shock very well. We did the visit quickly without further incidents, but something seemed wrong. Later, when I asked them what they thought, both said that the house had a heavy energy, something they couldn't explain. I agreed, but didn't go into details. In the end, they didn't make an offer, and I never went back. To this day, I think about that house and what happened, an experience that gave me chills, and the certainty that something there wasn't normal. That was 3 years ago, and the property remained on the market for almost 18 months before finally selling for well below the asking price. I occasionally checked the listing online, watching the price drop month after month. I felt a strange satisfaction when it finally sold, though I also felt a twinge of guilt for the unsuspecting family who bought it. I've shown hundreds of properties since then, but nothing has ever compared to that evening. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed longer in that kitchen, or if I'd been brave enough to explore the basement thoroughly. Would I have encountered something more substantial than opened cabinets and mysterious sounds? About a year after the incident, I ran into another agent from a competing firm who mentioned he had also shown that property. Without prompting, he lowered his voice and asked if I'd experienced anything unusual there. I played it cool, asking what he meant, and he described an identical scenario: the intercom, the cabinets, the overwhelming sense of being watched. The only difference was that he claimed to have seen a dark figure standing at the top of the basement stairs just before his clients arrived. I've never believed in ghosts or the paranormal. I still don't, not really. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone reviewing property listings, I find myself scrolling past certain older homes without even opening them. Call it instinct or superstition, but some properties just feel wrong before you even step through the door. And that house on Maple Drive, it felt wrong the moment I turned the key in the lock. Last month, out of curiosity, I drove past the house. A for sale sign was in the yard again. I didn't stop. Some properties are better left to braver agents than myself. There's no way I can close my eyes. It's as if my mind is in a spiral of madness. And to be fair, I only have myself to blame. I study at an incredibly old college in New Hampshire that was built in the 18th century as a seminary for Protestant ministers, right in the period when the old colonial laws were crumbling. Today, it's a mostly secular institution, but the religious roots are still quite present. Despite coming from a Protestant family and believing in God, I wouldn't define myself as particularly religious. In fact, the college is quite inclusive. All beliefs, nationalities, and sexual orientations are welcome, which creates a welcoming and vibrant community. As a history student, I recently discovered during a class that our college was the site of a massacre in 1775 during the early Revolution. British soldiers killed American rebels. Some fell on the steps of the main entrance. Others lost their lives inside the building. And that's when my stupidity came into play. I thought it would be a good idea to try to connect with the spirits, which, thinking now, was both insensitive and completely stupid. I did this, and well, I bitterly regret it. The campus has impressive architecture. Upon entering, you're faced with a wide area where the dining hall, library, main classrooms, student union building, and a meditation area are located. All of this is positioned directly in front or to the right. It's a place that resembles something from a Gothic novel, with endless stone steps connecting various floors. Although the building is enormous, the college has a reduced population among students, professors, and occasional visitors. And after 5 or 6 in the evening, it becomes almost completely empty, except for a few people in the library. To the left of the main entrance, a corridor leads to the old entrance hall. There, the chaplain and the college president live. In this space, there's a giant portrait that occupies almost an entire wall, and a set of stone stairs that ascends through several floors. I have a fascination with ghost stories and supernatural things, something that combines with my literary side, since I also study English. When I heard about the 1775 massacre, I decided to try to connect with the ghosts of the place. I used an app called Spirit Box EVP Recorder. Seriously, don't use this app. It's terrible. I can't affirm that it was the app that went wrong, but something, even if small, happened. Perhaps I meddled with something by opening my mind to this. I don't understand much about this subject, so I'm here trying to figure out what it was. At the end of the day, around 6 o'clock, I decided to go to a specific classroom located on the old stone steps. These rooms are hardly used but can be reserved, and therefore are often open. I chose one that gave a view to the entrance lawns, right at the point where, according to my calculations, the steps of the old entrance were where the massacre occurred. I sat at one of the desks and waited. I spent 4 or 5 minutes trying, asking various questions to the app, but nothing happened. Meanwhile, the rain was falling outside, and the room was getting darker and darker. The fear was growing, but I wanted a story to tell. I asked those classic questions, "Is anyone here?" and similar ones. It was when I finally heard a very low voice. I tried to capture it again, and it seemed to repeat something like "God is gone" about 3 or 4 times. For those who don't speak the colonial dialect, this phrase means God is gone. Still, it could very well have been just my imagination running wild, since the environment was leaving me on the edge of panic. Although many ministers of that time spoke this archaic dialect, it's hard to believe they would say something like that. I was beginning to put away my things, overcome by a bad feeling, when the classroom door suddenly opened and then closed forcefully. I froze, unable to move. The chill that ran through my body was indescribable. I remained standing next to the desk for about a minute before gathering the courage to leave. I went through the door, reached the corridor, and began to descend the stone steps. My arms were shaking so much that I could barely control my steps. The darkness seemed to invade my vision, as if fear was blinding me. When I reached the next landing, about to descend another flight of stairs, the same door behind me began to bang repeatedly with a force that seemed impossible. Accompanying the sound came a scream. It was a male voice, loud, loaded with confused words, but which seemed heavy with a strong accent from the region. The sound was terrifying, blood-curdling. My body alternated between intense heat and chills. The door wouldn't stop banging, even when I was already running toward the main entrance, the sound echoing through the corridors behind me. At this point, I was crying uncontrollably. I was shaking so much that I could barely walk. As soon as I managed to reach the street, I went straight to buy a soda and sat down to try to calm myself while waiting for my bus. I no longer had the conditions to stay on campus that night. I had planned to remain there until later, but fear took over me. Since that day, about a week or 2 ago, I haven't been able to sleep properly. It was the end of the academic year. The exams were already over, so at least that wasn't a problem. I work all day during the summer, and it's only when I'm surrounded by friends or colleagues that I can push these thoughts away. But when I'm alone, I can't stop reliving everything. Now I need to sleep with blankets covering every inch of my body, even in the heat. The idea of something touching my head at night terrifies me. I'm constantly exhausted. My mother, my girlfriend, and some siblings have noticed this. But despite their concern, I feel they don't understand the dimension of what I'm going through. I also don't like to bother them during the early hours, so I try to deal with this alone. I know I'm on the verge of a mental collapse, but before this, I was completely normal, balanced. I feel as if I'm going crazy, but I sleep at most 5 hours a night, and that's on the good days. Usually I stay awake until dawn, until 4 in the morning, even having to start work at 6. I know I can't continue like this for much longer. I need help. Has anyone experienced something similar? I've started seeing a counselor at the college health center, but I haven't told them about the supernatural aspects of what happened. I'm afraid they'll just write me off as having some kind of psychotic break. Instead, I've framed it as severe anxiety and insomnia following a panic attack on campus. Last night, I finally managed to fall asleep around 2, only to be jolted awake at 3:15 by what felt like someone sitting heavily on the edge of my bed. When I turned on the light, there was no one there, but the impression in the blanket remained as if someone had just stood up. My roommate suggested I talk to Professor Whitaker in the history department. Apparently, he's known for his interest in the college's darker history and might have encountered others with experiences similar to mine. I've made an appointment to see him tomorrow. I don't know if learning more about what happened that night in 1775 will help or make things worse, but I'm desperate for any answers at this point. Whatever came through that door, whatever followed me down those stairs, I'm increasingly convinced it wasn't just a random spirit or my imagination. It felt personal, targeted, as if by attempting to communicate, I specifically drew its attention. And now I can't shake the feeling that it's still with me, watching, waiting for me to be vulnerable again. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.